Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next open conversation. Today, we're going to do something a little different for patrons as a timed exclusive. And as you can see, I am joined by my good friend over here, Mr. Tie Guy Travis, better known as Travis Northup, or maybe the reverse of that. But we have talked offline quite heavily around what makes a good game review. And I know we've talked on Twitter a lot. There's a lot of discussion on the social space around good in quotes game reviews, good outlets that review games, who you trust for your game reviews, be it a certain outlet, a certain person. And because Travis and I have such a broad experience, obviously, as everyone knows, I write a lot of reviews for Season Gaming, which is a small indie outlet. Travis is very much the reverse, does a lot of reviews for the biggest gaming site in the world. And so we've talked offline a lot about our perspective on how we review games. Is it a critical point of view, opinion? How does the 1 to 10 scale factor in? All these other kind of methodologies around reviewing games. And we thought it would be fun for the two of us just to sit down and speak our mind, really, and answer some of these kind of big questions. So we hope you enjoy this. If you do, of course, leave a comment, let us know. But we're going to dive right in to some of the things that we think make a good game review from our perspective. What's up, man?
How you doing?
I am good. It is we both have already been recording for hours today, but we're gonna get into it anyway. It's what we do.
What is it, 11 where you're at, or
10?
10. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get started at 10. I've been drinking, I'm ready to go. Let's go.
Nice. I've been napping. I don't know if that's the equivalent. Just woke up from a nap.
But we've talked about this offline quite a bit. And I know that
in our
when
first discussion a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think in our one-on-one a while ago. Yeah. And I think that, you publish a lot of reviews and they're very widely read, being on IGN, of course. And then I kind of developed a reputation, which I'm very kind of proud of, for my reviews for Season Gaming, and developed a little bit of a reputation for those. So I think we can both kind of offer really good perspective. And I think you can offer really kind of quality insight, because a lot of people, as you well know, you've been on the brunt of it, question an outlet like IGN's reviews, right? And I think just insight behind the whole process that we both go through, both personally and from an outlet perspective, would be insightful. So where should we start on this?
Well, the first question I wrote down was, what is the purpose of a review? Because you can say what is a review, but I don't know if that gets to the core of it. Really, what is the end goal of a review? Like, what are you supposed to get away from it? And that's an interesting question, because I think, at least myself, I have a very strong opinion of what a review is, which I guess that is sort of a review in itself. But I don't know what your guys' methodology is. I did read some of your reviews before this recording just to kind of understand what your style was. What do you guys have a style guide? I assume something you wrote.
We do.
Like, here's the stuff that you go over, and you do that thing where you rank certain aspects of it, and then you find an average to the total score. Is that it? Like, it's got
not quite
technical performance, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So we try to give an insight to kind of replayability, technical performance, and but the final score is separate. It's a standalone score. You like an overall score for the game, and then the other aspects, which is why we make them smaller, and we call this out in our review guide, is really kind of just a reflection of certain aspects. So if someone goes into a game that is known to have co-op, right, we try to talk about what the co-op is in the written portion of it, and then say from a replayability standpoint, it's a higher score because you can go through it multiple different ways, right?
Right. So a game could get a replayability score of 0, like a Journey or something, but still
correct,
like a perfect score. Okay.
Yeah, there's lots of games we have like that have gotten like a 9, right? But then the replayability, I may give it like a 3, right? Because once you experience once.
The only minor score? I kind of remember there being other ones as well.
No, there's replayability, and then there's fun factor, which is really, that's more of a very 100% on the writer, right? Like what you think of that game from a fun perspective. And then the technical performance, etc. So yeah, it's those were added just as kind of like addendums to the overall score.
Right. So what is, because to me, the fun factor almost seems like it is the final score. What's the difference between fun factor and the final score? Like, what is the final score supposed to represent, if not fun factor?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Put me on the spot here. So
sorry, I'm just curious. These are organic questions. I didn't plan for these. So,
no, it's fine. So I would say that, and I think it's obviously up for interpretation, like probably most of this conversation. But fun factor for us would be something like, trying to think of a good example of a game. So say a game is, it's incredibly fun. So this might be a
Fun,
bad
but not
example.
a good game, like your Earth Defense Force.
You've talked about that before, right? I don't have a lot of experience with that, but exactly a good point, right? Like you can turn on this game, it's mindless fun. You can play with friends, maybe not. That comes to the replayability factor. Can you just turn it on, have a laugh, have a good time? But maybe the game itself has technical issues. Maybe it is light on content. Maybe Mario Strikers, the recent one, would be a good example, right? That would probably have a very high fun factor, but from an overall game perspective, it's lacking in a number of areas, right? That's kind of what that is meant to represent.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
but
I'm
we kind of
fascinated
make
by
it
how
clear
people
that,
do.
yeah, I was going to say, we kind of make it clear that the score, that the final score is separate, right? These other things are more of like, hey, this is just the reviewer, the writer's view on these aspects of the game.
Right.
But those should be clear by reading the review too, right?
Which hopefully people are doing. How long are your reviews, by the way?
Right.
How many words?
They vary, and we're not as tight on kind of editing down a review, right? So a lot of outlets, and you can obviously tell us what IGN does, but a lot of outlets, especially major ones, will say they have to be cut a certain way, right? 1,500, 2,000 words, something like that. Whereas we do aim for anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 words, I believe. But we definitely have writers and reviewers at SG that write longer than others, right? And I think we also kind of leave room there for the type of game. So if it's, for instance, what did I review recently that was small? Can't think of a good example, but if it's a small indie game that is like, say it again.
As Dusk Falls, is that? No? Okay. I don't know.
Nope, not that one.
Okay. I don't know.
Not that one. But say it's a small indie game that is like 3 hours long, right? That's a single journey versus something that has 100 hours of gameplay. Like you're reviewing Xenoblade Chronicles 3, right? There might be a lot more you need to say about that versus say a small indie game. So
yeah, I mean, hopefully not. So I guess since you grilled me, since I grilled you, you can grill me if you want. But yeah, our word count is like recommended. You try to get it into like 1,500, but 1,500 words is like a good review. But if you have less to say less. If you have more to say more, obviously. But the only consideration, like hard rule on how many words you do, is when you're coming up with a video script. The video script, we try to keep like the video length between like 7 and 10 minutes. And so usually for that, it's got to be like between 15 and 1,800 words, probably at the most. And you have to figure out what parts of your review you can get rid of for the sake of the video. And so that's sometimes challenging because some people only watch our reviews on YouTube and they don't read the article. And so they'll watch the video and be like, wow, he didn't even talk about this. And I'll be like, read the review. The full review's out there. It has more content in it. Although that actually changed a little bit. IGN just recently, for whatever reason, decided that reviews were going to be a little bit longer in length. And so my word count has gone up, which means I have to cut less from the review. And in some cases I cut nothing, which is awesome because I really have a hard time cutting down the written review into a video script. It's such a brutal process. So
that's interesting because we don't do video, like obviously IGN being as big as you guys are, right? You're doing written and video do you do it for every review?
Yes.
Okay. So at IGN, at SG, we do only a few video reviews. So we pick specific games to do video reviews. But when we do, the script is, I would say, 95% of the written review. So it's very similar to what you're going to get in the written review. We only cut it down simply for kind of the spoken word versus the written word.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So are some of your video reviews really long then?
Yes.
People write a lot of content?
Yes. So like Elden Ring, I did the video review for Elden Ring, and I'm going off the top of my head here. I want to say it's 17 minutes. So that's a discussion in itself, right? Because like I know big outlets like IGN have typically had, like you said, 7-8 minute reviews, whereas you have those other kind of big content creators that'll do a 25-minute review. And
Yeah.
it's
So
like,
I wrote that on the run of show. It was near the end, but
oh,
like,
sorry.
no, it's fine. We can hop to it. We still haven't talked about what the purpose of review is, but maybe we should get to it later.
Yeah, this is really an open conversation at this
Yeah.
point. We're just
But yeah,
so purpose of a review. Let's go back to
purpose
that.
of review. We'll go there. We'll get to length later because I also have opinions about that. But
Okay.
yeah, for me, the purpose of the review is really, it's one person's opinion, obviously, but the goal is to give readers a sense of what it's like to play the game, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and overall, is it a good game or not? Was it worth your time? Was it worth playing? And if you can give an impression of that to the player, preferably in as little time as possible, not tweet length. I'm not a fan of like tweets as reviews.
Yes.
But if you can get that as succinctly as possible while also still providing all the pertinent details, I think that is a successful review. And when I say pertinent details, we've talked about this before, about how I challenge myself to not write a single sentence in any of my reviews that doesn't contain opinion. Yep. And I do that just because I feel like if it's not something that tells you helps answer the question, is it a good or bad game? Is it worth your time to play? Then you're sort of just, that you're not writing toward the goal, right? And so I try to make everything opinionated. Like, even if I'm summarizing the plot, I'll put in some sort of word that states what my opinion of the plot is. Like the cliche quest is about a boy on a quest to save a princess, something like that. And then that way you at least let them know, like, this is how I feel about the plot that I'm telling you, rather than here's what the plot is, now here's what the gameplay is, and that sort of thing. Like, every single sentence should tell you not only what it is, but how you felt about what it was, and preferably with some examples of that. And so I'm really like a stickler on that. Like, I'll catch myself. I'll read my review after I'm done, and I'll be like, that is useless. That's a useless sentence. Can I add a word that makes it an opinion? And if the answer is no, I just take it out, because they can get the information about what the game is from somewhere else. And I don't think that that's a purpose of the review. The purpose of the review is to tell you only what it is, and purpose of if it's good or not, in my opinion. That's the way that I approach a review. So all my reviews are just like, from literally the opening sentence to the final sentence, it's just my opinion, my opinion, my opinion, my opinion. And some people who don't know what a review is, which from what I can tell in the comment section is a lot of people don't know what a review is, they get kind of offended because they're like, this is just your opinion. And I'm like, yeah, it is. That's the review. That's what reviews are. They asked for my opinion, and I wrote, as many words as I did about it. So that's my view of a review. What a purpose of review is. Be curious if you had any other opinions or quibbles with that description or anything like that.
Well, I think what you described, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we've talked about it. Is that an IGN kind of direction? Generally, obviously, we're not talking hard lines here, but generally speaking, is it preferred that you kind of every sentence or every thought kind of have an opinion behind it?
I wouldn't say it's like a hard rule for IGN style guide, but it's something I absolutely learned from my editor, Dan Stapleton. And he has it as like a challenge, and he almost like challenges you to do it. And he's like, can you make this an opinion? And for me, I take it as like it's like a commandment. I'm like, it must be an opinion, because I love that rule. And I also wrote a lot of reviews when I was working for smaller outlets. And the thing I liked about smaller outlets is you had more freedom. There was less of a styles guide and less of like here's how you write a good review. But I also hated that I didn't really have any guidance. And even after I wrote for 7 years for those outlets, and even after 7 years, I never really had a lot of identity to my reviews. And it wasn't until I started to write for a large outlet where there were people who were like, we know what a good review is, and here's what it was, that I was sort of like indoctrinated. I was like, that is like, why doesn't everybody write their reviews like that? And it was just one of those things where if you went down like the style guide for IGN, I feel like I wrote it, right? It's like, that's how I think of reviews, but I didn't write it. It was the other way around, where they told me this is what we think a good review is. And I sort of was like, that's a good point. Like, I never thought of it that way. But there are obviously people who, my two bosses, Tom Marks and Dan Stapleton, have been in the industry for years, and they're like, especially Dan, he's a hard editor. Like, every time I write a review, it's
he's done this for a long time.
Oh yeah, and it's like red ink across it, and he's just like, he's always obsessed with things being better. And he also has a lot of pet peeves, which I've never had an editor with so many pet peeves, but I like it because it kind of causes you to rethink how you say everything, and it challenges you. And I'm here for the challenge. You know, that to me is, I have a joy of writing. That's not really what reviews are about, but I really have a joy of like making myself better at that sort of thing. So it works for me. So to answer your question, it's not a hard rule, but it's something I personally, I'm like zealous about. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be so opinionated, right? And my boss says that's what we're paying you for, your opinion, right? If you wanted somebody to write a summary of the game, we could just let the guides team write up, you know, what the summary of the game is. But that's not what we want. We want your opinion, and we want you to have no fear in stating your opinion. If you loved it, say you loved it. If you hated it, say you hated it. If you felt it was so, then find the most entertaining and succinct way to say the parts that were good and the parts that were bad. That's thing. So
it is really interesting, and I know you've told me a lot of that before, but for the audience, I find it interesting because, you know, we're obviously the other end of the spectrum, much smaller site, much smaller audience, and we write reviews on a voluntary basis, pretty much, right? We're not someone where you know, 20 games are coming in a day and we're assigning them out, right? Like, people kind of volunteer to write a review on a game, and so that will lead us into another aspect that we're going to touch on. But generally speaking, I would say we're definitely broader. I mean, I can say definitively we're broader in how you approach a review. Like if you read my review versus say Eric or Nate or any of the other writers at SG, you're going to know it's a very different review. And that, in my opinion, can be good or bad, because I definitely like what you're saying about having hard editors, a hard direction, not necessarily a hard line, but a stiffer direction, maybe a better way to phrase it.
Yeah, there's more guidance.
Yes, on how you approach it. And I think there's positives with that for sure. It's obviously more challenging in an indie outlet to do that, you know, with volunteer writers. But I would add
the whip as much.
So, and you know, when it's on a voluntary basis too, I want people to feel that they can express themselves more. Now we're not as hard of a line on having kind of every statement be an opinion, but I do agree with you that you also don't want your review to be a summary of the game, right? Like we had, and I'm not going to name names, of course, but we had someone who recently started reviewing games, and they were very long and they were very descriptive. And I went back to him and I basically said, this is too long, and you're just, and if I haven't finished reading it yet, but my guess is that you're describing game mechanics in detail. And they responded to me and said, yes, that's what I'm doing. And I said, we don't need that in the review, right? Because it's a mistake, as you probably well know, right? A lot of early review writers do is they start to say, okay, here's what the game is. So did I. And as you play, you do this, and then you do this, and X and Y and Z. And before you know it, you've got 4,000 words describing the gameplay. And it's very challenging when you first start writing reviews from a critical perspective to stop that. And it takes time, really, in my opinion, to do that. So we are not as hard on that, but I would say that, I do think that there is more kind of a overarching description of the game in our reviews, probably, than some of the bigger outlets. Not to the gameplay detail, like I said, but kind of, you know, certain high level things. Whether or not that's right or wrong, I don't really have a broad opinion on. I kind of, like I said, a little more free with how our writers review the games. We do edit them down, obviously. I'm very fortunate that one of our writers and editors is literally a writer, like a professional writer. He's writing a 6-series novel, 6-book novel right now. Is Elu Spook?
Oh, Elu. Okay.
Yeah, he's a fantasy novel. He's writing his own, like, I don't want to compare it for him, but, you know, Game of Thrones, like he's writing his own book series. So he is incredibly detailed, and we're very fortunate that he kind of gives a lot of our stuff passes because he's excellent. But anyway, generally thinking, I completely agree with you. Purpose of a review is to inform the reader of the type of the game, of the type of game it is, and kind of whether or not you enjoyed it as the writer and player, right? Which I think, if you can do that in a succinct way, as you said, I agree with you on almost all fronts here. If you can do that in a succinct way and leave the reader feeling like in their head, especially if there's someone who plays games often, can kind of imagine what that game is in their head, and whether or not they feel they would enjoy it, you've done your job. The one question I want to pose back to you is, one of the things we do in our kind of style guide, right, as a basis is kind of where that game sits in terms of its genre and its peers in the industry. So, right, like if you're writing about, I keep trying to come up with examples on the fly, which is stupid. But, you know, if you look at a certain type of game and you say, okay, this is an open world RPG that, you know, is 50 hours long or what have you, what type of game is the developer going for here? And what would be its peers in the industries, and how does it stack up against those peers? Do you feel that's fair to do in a review?
So I think that no matter what, if you're reviewing a game, it's impossible to pretend that game exists in a vacuum.
In a vacuum,
You're going to compare it to other games, because if there's a feature that is widely adopted in other games and this game doesn't have it, you're going to be like, why doesn't it have this feature that's in a bunch of other games?
So, the old climbing in Horizon versus Breath of the Wild.
Exactly. You'll be like, what? Why did they do that? So I think that's going to happen no matter what. What I don't think is helpful is comparing it to other games in terms of like where it sits in terms of greatness. And the reason for that is because I think it becomes really less about the game and more about the game as it's applied to other games that you've already played, which you're already kind of going to be comparing it against those games anyway. It's impossible to like take those games out of your head, and you probably shouldn't do that anyway, because more games is going to make you more knowledgeable about what's good and what's bad. But I was going to say, it's leaving my brain right now. What was the question again? Yeah. Is it good to compare it to other games?
Look at peer titles, basically.
Peer titles. I had such a great idea in my brain, and it's
well. Let me help you real quick. So, let me just kind of explain further my point. There is, we don't specifically say, or don't aim to say, like if you're reviewing Horizon Forbidden West, again, here I go with examples, right? Like, how does that compare to Elden Ring? No, you don't want to do that, right? But you should, in your mind, as you're thinking about this game, like Guerrilla set out to do what with Horizon Forbidden West.
Okay.
Right?
I remember what I was going to say.
Okay, good. I figured I'd help you. So did they achieve what they set out to do with this game?
This is one of the things that I think should not be a part of a review.
Okay.
Is what did they set out to do? Because I hear this all the time. Commenters go, oh, well, you may have not liked that thing, but the developer was going for this, and that is part of this, and therefore it's good. The problem with that argument is that it breaks apart immediately if you look at it with any sort of critical eye, because one, you're assuming that you know what the developer wanted, and that requires a lot of background research that doesn't really have anything to do with the game, to be honest. It sort of just like lives outside of the game what they wanted. And two, the developer could just disingenuously say, oh, you know what, I wanted to make a game that was a buggy mess like Postal 4, and then you have to go, well, look, guys, that's what they said they were going for, 10 out of 10. You know what I mean? And so I have a problem with that argument, and I run into that all the time because I'm currently reviewing a JRPG.
Yep.
If you've ever played a JRPG, you know that they have a lot of tropes and old mechanics and crutches that they sometimes lean on. I'm not saying that the game I'm reviewing right now necessarily meets that bar, but like Persona 5 as an example is a game that has a lot of JRPG things that I think aren't good mechanics. And when you criticize them, people will say, well, that's just part of the genre, Travis. They were going for that. Yep. And then when they do that, I go, no. You don't let them off because they were going for that. Like, you know,
not to get us off topic, but I've had that argument with people about Breath of the Wild, which, you know, I have a bone to pick with. But people have 100%. Said to me, but it's a Zelda game. And I'm like, but that doesn't excuse bad mechanics or design. You can't just say 100%. It's a Zelda game. Yeah.
100%. And people make that argument. Here's a game that you and I both love, Elden Ring. People will say, oh, well, Travis, the fact that the story doesn't make any sense is sort of part of the genre. And I go, no.
That's not fair.
No. You don't get to do that.
Yep.
The story in Elden Ring is, for all intents and purposes, pretty weak. You really have to search for it. And I get it. Some people like that. But it is 100% a fair criticism to be like, you kind of get a little lost in the story because it doesn't really tell it very well. And if you liked that it was a little obtuse with its story, more power to you. If you're writing the review, you can turn that into a positive. But if I'm writing it and I didn't like the story, that is a valid criticism. You're not allowed to just hand wave my criticism away.
Correct.
Because it's part of the genre. And I really don't like the argument about developer intent. I don't think it matters, because whether or not the developer intended to make something and what they actually made is completely different. I mean, some people take really political messages away from games like Assassin's Creed, and then you talk to the developer and they're like, oh, we're not a political studio. And you're like, but I thought your game was political, so it doesn't really matter what you thought, right? And maybe some of the developers working for that don't share the same views as the mouthpiece that's speaking on the developer's behalf and saying it's not political. And so I don't really think it has nothing to do with if the game is good or not, or whether you liked it, right?
Very true.
It shouldn't inform your opinion. And two, it's too easy to break apart that argument and just say, what does that have to do with anything? I don't like, who cares what the developer wanted? I'm judging the game I played, the game that I got. So,
yeah. And I think that kind of, to double down on your viewpoint there, which I agree with, which is, we have to remember that the social space that we live in, right, for an outlet on the Twitterverse, in the social space talking about games, is a vast minority of the people playing these games. And so the people playing these games, you can't assume they know anything to do with the developer or the studio or the message behind it or anything else. They're only playing the game.
Ains, you're preaching right now my gospel. This is something I talk about so often online, because it's so funny how much people on Twitter who care about games and read like if you read SG articles, you are such a hardcore gamer, because like I'm writing for every reader, right?
Correct.
Like, let's be honest. If you aren't that into gaming, you probably read a couple big outlets that are easy to find, and IGN's probably one of them.
Yep.
And so different outlets are catering to different people, but the way I think about reviews is I want to write a review that is helpful to the most amount of people, that isn't, and that's why I have a little bit of a bone to pick with like a skill up review that's 30 minutes long or an hour long. Cause I'm just like, I mean, who's that for? Like, who has an hour to find out if they should play a game? Like, at that point you could have played like half the game sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, depending on the game. So, I'm trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator, to put it in a harsh way. But it really is. I mean, if I'm doing my review right, it can be helpful to the most veteran player who wants to know about a game before it's out, and the most neophyte player who's never played a game in the series. And if I can,
which is a tough line to walk.
100% tough line to walk. I think the way you can do it, one of the ways to help it, is to not make it as much about mechanics and explaining the story, and make it more about your opinions on things. Because it's very good to give examples of why something is bad, or say, hey, this is a gun in the game that I really liked because it does this. And that appeals to everyone, because if somebody's really familiar with the game and you tell them this gun is cool, somebody who doesn't know what the gun is and somebody who really knows what it is will be like, oh, that's great, good example. But if you're talking about like, oh, they updated it from the third game and went back to what they did in the second game, except for this time this mechanic does this a little differently. If you're doing that and I'm just a regular reader, I'm going to click away from that review. I have no idea what you're talking about. And if you're appealing to too narrow an audience, I think you do a disservice to the purpose of the review, which is to help people navigate the marketplace and understand what's worth their time. That's sort of what I'll try to walk.
It's funny because what you touch on there is ties into the methodology of season gaming at its core, right? Which is literally why we're named season gaming, is that we've been gaming a long time, and that it's for the hardcore reader. But that being said, right, and let me add to that. So that does touch on exactly what you said, is we typically write, even our news articles, right, on a day-to-day basis, are written from the perspective of you have a fundamental knowledge of the gaming industry, right?
Right. You have to be assumptive that if they found you, they are a certain level of informed.
Correct. Yeah. And that obviously is a smaller audience by 100-fold, right, or more than IGN by a massive amount, which is fine, and that's why we're designed the way. And I think there's room for both. All that said, I do agree with you that there is a line where you can go too far down that path, where you're getting too descriptive, too detailed. You're going into more than you need to give the reader or watcher, if you're watching videos, an informed opinion, right, of what they're getting into. So, and I think on that topic, that's a good segue into the other big thing that always comes up with reviews, which is, our reviews, and I know you're a very hard line on this, but I'm going to pose it anyway. Are reviews a person's opinion solely?
Yes, they are. And I mean, that's the answer, straight up.
See, I knew you were hard line.
The reason it's the answer is because it cannot be anything else. If somebody had already come up with a way to objectively rate games on a scale of 1 to 10, no outlets would exist. There would be no, because we have this mathematical formula apparently where we can just tell you if a game is good or bad. And so what do we need Metacritic for? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a whole bunch of people's opinions. So when I get hired to write a review for IGN, when they reach out and say, hey, Travis, we want your opinion on this game, they're paying me because they know that I know a lot about games and that I have opinions about them. And so when I play a game, I'm going to have something to say about it, and I'm going to be able to tell to people whether it's good or bad. There's no way to make an opinion anything but there's no way to make a review anything but your opinion, because you are answering a subjective question, which is it good? What is justice, as Socrates would ask with his horribly disfigured face? What is justice, right? Well, what is
I thought
good?
you're Socrates.
I'm Socrates, sorry. So I'm asking you, what is justice? But yeah, I mean, that is the question, right? And so if the question is this game good or bad? What about it did you like or didn't you like? There is no way it could be anything but an opinion. And so you should own that. And I think some people try to say, oh, well, we're above that. It's not just one person's opinion. We really look at things a little bit more hardcore and but it doesn't matter how good you think you are at understanding things and breaking down game mechanics. At the end of the day, the question of is it good or bad is an opinion question. And so reviews can only be an opinion. So if you have trouble with that, if you're a reader of these things and you go, well, why would I just want to read one person's opinion? That's not helpful to me. Fair enough. My advice to you would be find the people that you think you tend to agree with and follow them. Lots of people like certain personalities out there that write certain reviews. I know Rick Hogue is really into Mitch Saltzman's reviews. So anytime he writes a review, he goes, okay, I'll take that. I'll take that opinion. Right. And if you don't have people that you tend to agree with, look at Metacritic, because Metacritic is an aggregate of all the opinions out there from people who are informed and have gotten Metacritic to agree to let them put their score up there. Yep. It's not a perfect system. It doesn't mean that the score on Metacritic is more valid than any of the parts that make up that score, but it does mean that if you tend to consider yourself somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, you will see opinions from lots of people who know a lot. Just stay away from the user reviews because they're cesspool. So yeah, reviews are 100% opinions, and I will hear no argument.
The funny thing here is I quite literally agree with everything you just said, top to bottom.
Yes, finally we agree on something.
I have to add a caveat.
Oh no! Wow. Okay.
The only caveat, and I think you'll agree with this, because I'm not trying to say that a review isn't an opinion. Very clearly, to your point that you defined very well, it cannot be anything but an opinion. It just can't, right? From a technical perspective. But I do think that if a reviewer is doing a good job, even from an opinion standpoint, right, there are some critical aspects that have to be looked at a game. Of a game, excuse me. So I think if you are a experienced reviewer who, which, quite frankly, I'll say we both are at this point, right? You know what a good game plays like versus a bad game. You know what a good animation is of a character versus a poor animation. You know what a good online experience is versus a bad online experience, right? And I think the only thing I would add is, yes, it's still all opinion. That's true. But you should be able to describe to some degree within your review that makes sense to other gamers or people who have played a number of games, where you can define those details, right? Like you should be able to define what a good game mechanic feels like that's in the game versus one that's just very poorly implemented. Like, you know what I mean? So I think you're being critical of the game itself. I think you're
saying justifying your opinions with
correct.
Something you experienced. So
correct.
That is 100% a part of a good opinion. But even if you give an example, 100% of something that should be considered the standard in all games, some people can be like, well, that's true. It is the standard in all games. The shooting mechanics are really well done. But that kind of bores me because it's like every other game, and I just didn't really like that, right?
Sure.
And so they can have an opinion on it,
Sure.
even if it's a well implemented mechanic. In the same vein, somebody can look at a game that is an absolute nightmare, like Earth Defense Force, and go, "Look, this game shouldn't work. The game mechanics are sloppy. The frame rate rocks constantly, sometimes going to like 3 frames a second." But I was laughing the whole time. I was just having such a good time. It's a good game. I liked it. I personally think it's a good game. So
Yes.
I think that you absolutely should in your review justify and give reasons and examples for everything that you say, if
Yep.
possible. Give reasoning behind it. But I don't think that your justifications couldn't just be countered by somebody else. The one caveat I will allow is if you say that the game is buggy and crashes and has serious technical problems. Those are objective facts. And if somebody sees, look, dude, I've got all these frames of Postal 4 crashing on me just a million times in my play. Look, I'm going to show them in the video review. And then somebody goes, oh, it's not that buggy. What can I say? You didn't experience the crashes. I'm telling you the ones I experienced, right? But even those, somebody might not mind the crashes as much as you. Maybe they're just like, oh, whatever. It just crashed a few times. I rebooted it. And so to them, it's not a major reason to not recommend the game. And so even the most hardcore objective examples of like this game had technical issues, somebody else might think that that's not a big deal. Think about all the people that love Nintendo Switch games that do not perform well, right?
Yeah.
To them, the technical aspect, and I actually find myself in this boat. The technical aspect matters, but not that much. It really doesn't. I don't mind playing games in 30 frames. I really don't. If the game lends itself to that, if it's a Twitch shooter, then I'm probably going to be a little irked by 30 frames. But most games that went on the Switch at 30 frames, I'm not bothered by. And so it really, even the most hardcore examples I can think of, there is leeway for it to possibly be an opinion.
I would think that I agree with you. I would think that there's just that the reader reading your review should know that about you and your opinion of the game.
Yeah. So I think hopefully if you say, look, it has technical problems, but they didn't bother me, that somebody who's reading that would go, oh, well, I would never play a game that's 60 frames. I disagree with this reviewer. Or they would say, yeah, okay, he says it doesn't matter that the games has technical issues. And then I find myself in that boat. I can forgive it. I do this all the time when I talk about video game cliches in stories. Like cliches bug the crap out of me. And sometimes I'll post and just be like, dude, this game has so many cliches. But sometimes I'm like, but sometimes cliches are cliches for a reason, man. Sometimes
they're meant to be that way.
Sometimes it's just fun when things work out that way. I said that exact line in Trek to Yomi, that game has lots of cliches in the story, but I was like, but it's sort of trying to be like a samurai movie, and I've watched lots of those samurai movies, and so when I saw the cliches, I was like, this is like every samurai movie I've seen. It gave me the warm fuzzies. And again, my opinion, somebody who's never seen a samurai movie or doesn't like samurai movies might just see that and go, this is more of the same. It's drivel. I don't like it. Fair enough. I will never begrudge anyone for their differing opinion. I'll just tell them that they're wrong because my opinions are better. And that's, it's within my right to do so.
Yeah, as you were talking about technical issues, I thought of 2 reviews I did. So I reviewed Cyberpunk, which is probably one of the most famous examples at this point, and I reviewed Returnal. And in Cyberpunk, I called out that one, I didn't experience all the craziness that some people did. And I was, it's sadly in today's world, you kind of have to call the platform you're playing on too, because that can vary as well.
Yep.
But like a bug where, for instance, a car was coming out of the ground, I found funny. And I call it out, right? But it didn't impact my enjoyment of the game. Whereas in Returnal, I had a couple runs where I'm like an hour and 45 minutes in, the game crashes and I lose all progress. That's a very different, those are 2 very different technical issues, right? And I feel it's at least my responsibility to comment on those as part of the review.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think that's 100% fair. Tom Marks, one of my bosses, he reviewed Cyberpunk, and he still is like traumatized to this day because he gave that game a 9. And then when it came out, everybody was like, this game doesn't run. You're a monster, Mark. You're Tom. You're a paid shill, all this stuff. And he was like, dude, I played it on PC. I didn't run into the bugs that I ran into almost no bugs. And so he was on your exact side where he was just like, I didn't experience that. I get that you guys did because you were playing on Xbox One, but
I can't review something I didn't play.
Exactly. You can't review something you didn't play. And that sometimes crosses over into, I have an early access copy of the game and it has a bunch of bugs, and then the day one patch comes and it doesn't have some. And so we could talk about the intricacies of that, because I think some people would like to know about that, but that's another interesting question. But at the end of the day, even with the caveat of, hey, reviewer, here's a list from the developer of the things that are going to be addressed in the day one patch. So if you see them, just know that they've already been fixed, which I do. I honor those. But even with that, you can't review a version of the game you didn't play.
Yeah.
You just can't. You saw those bugs.
And we've seen many times where something is said to be fixed in a future update and it's still not at release, right? So you can't just say they said this is fixed, so don't worry about it. Like that's not what I play.
Well, I actually do say that in reviews. I don't say don't worry about it though. I say I experienced this bug, but they said it's going to be fixed in a day one patch.
Yes,
so maybe
exactly.
It won't matter. I say that, but I still will call it out if I see it and it's like big enough to where it's like, it would be weird if I wrote a review and didn't mention this thing that kept happening to me, this giant bug. That if that would color your opinion or completely make it so you were reviewing a game you didn't play, you should absolutely call it out and then just say the facts. I encountered this, but they say it's going to be fixed.
Yep.
That's the best you can do. So
100%. Yeah. So the I would say one of the other biggest aspects that gets questioned a lot, and this I think has become more prevalent in the past several years with YouTube reviewers and content creators and more people reviewing games, is scoring. So as you well know, you've mentioned Metacritic, OpenCritic's up there too. And IGN, both IGN and SG have a 1 to 10 scale, as many other sites do, of course. But there are other reviewers out there who do different scales, or they don't give a score at all. And so there was a time for years, actually, I would say 3 to 4 years at SG, where we didn't do scores. We didn't feel it was the right approach. And then we got to a place where, one, being completely honest, right? If you want to be included in the OpenCritic, Metacritic kind of scoring,
the roundups,
the roundups, all those other things, right? You need a score. But the other thing is that, and we'll talk more about this, I know, is that having a score is, like it or not, and there's a lot of kind of exceptions we'll probably talk about here, like it or not, it is a fast way to give someone an interpretation of the quality of a game. A 3 is not going to be as good, in quotes, of a game as a 9, period. In theory, right? I mean, obviously, we're back to opinions again. But, there's other people, I've talked to ACG, and I have a good relationship with him, and we did a nice 2-hour conversation a while ago, but he's a pretty famous YouTube reviewer, reviews a ton of games, doesn't give a review score. He has his own scale that he uses. Some people like that, some people don't, what have you. But in your opinion, IGN does a 1 to 10. They don't do half scores anymore. They don't do the 100 anymore like they used to.
Thank God.
Because 9.8 versus 9.6 was really weird.
That. When I started writing for IGN, we were on a 100-point scale with the decimals.
Yeah, it was. I remember because I go way back with IGN before they were big at all, right? And I remember a game would get like a 7.9, and they're like, the game's not even an 8, like it's garbage, and it's like, oh my god.
I gave Destiny a 7.9 on one of its DLCs, and people tore me up. And I was like, they were like, what does that even mean? And I was like, it means it's really good, not great, not yet great. That's what I said. And they were like, I guess.
So you guys have moved to pure 1 to 10. We do basically a 20 point. We do half points as well.
Okay. So you guys are 1 foot over. You'll come to our side eventually. Trust me.
we actually, believe it or not, we started when we went to scores. We did 1 to 10, and then for whatever reason, we had a long discussion about it, and we felt that just adding the half point gave a little nuance to the score. That's just what we felt.
Weak. It's because they're weak, Ains, and they can't make decisions. They can't just put their foot down and decide on a number. So here's my problem with decimals.
Okay.
I need to know what the decimal means. That's why
I can tell you.
So you have different words to describe them?
No.
That's my problem.
It's on our review policy though. Like we do describe it. Just go ahead.
I have to have a word to associate with your letter, with your number, right? So if it's an 8 in IGN, that means great. 9 means amazing. I don't know what an 8.5 is.
Right. Fair.
That's great, amazing, fair. Right? So like I can't separate those two. And so what that means to me, 8.5, is that it's better than great, not yet amazing. But the problem is, even if you gave me a word for that, it wouldn't tell me anything that I need to know. And so if you're using a score to help describe a game, it actually behooves you to have fewer options that have very clear definitions than more options where people get lost in like what makes something a 7.8 or 7.9, what makes something an 8.5 versus a 9. And if you were going to do a 20-point system, you would have to have such specific definitions for all those things because it's so many that at that point they might as well just read the whole review, right? Because you have now 20.
Well, hopefully they're doing that anyway.
But if your goal is to summarize, right?
Sure.
Having 20 different definitions that the reader has to remember and follow along with, it just gets difficult. So I'm a big believer in, and when we were advocating, I had nothing to do with this because I'm a freelancer, but when IGN management was advocating for a 10-point system, I was like, yes, please kill these points. And I feel like it's just made things so much clearer because now if you see a 7 or an 8 or a 9, you know exactly what that means. There's no nuance or why did it get a 6.1? What the heck is that? It's just, it tells you exactly what it is. And that is the purpose of the number. Because if the purpose of the number was to give you no clue whatsoever and you have to read the article to get more, then, a 100-point system, fine. But I just think that that's not the purpose. I think it's to just give you the cliff notes and give you a very easy impression of what it is. So
I completely agree with you on the 100-point system because that just gets ridiculous, right? Like there's no nuance between a 7.2 and a 7.3.
Follow me to the 10-point. I'm gonna get you there, Ains.
So I will tell you, being fair, I completely understand what you're saying, and that's where we started. We were 1 to 10, and the discussion we ended up having, right, and to directly answer your point, was the only reason we added half points. And to be clear, we're very similar to you guys, just different wording. Where we've talked about this before, and you made fun of our words,
honorable.
but
it was awards, and I was like, "What honorable?"
We're different. We do medals from.
Was it loyal to its wife? What's this?
7, 8, 9, 10 get different medals, and a 7.5 gets the same medal as a 7, from a medal perspective. But the only reason I know, but the reason we added the half point was simply just to give a little more nuance for specific examples where a game it almost kind of goes back to the discussion we had on peer titles, right? So say why I keep trying to go to examples, but say a game comes out and you say, okay, this is a pretty solid game. We'll use IGN scale here, which is good as a 7, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so say this is a good game. It's obviously better than average, right? It's not a 5, and we'll get to the whole other discussion, which is using the full scale. That's a different topic. But it's a 7, right? It's a in our case that would be honorable, and what we meant by that, we've talked about this, but what honorable we meant by mention. That,
I get it.
Yeah, it's like an honorable, like this is a better than average game that is not fantastic, sensational, etc. But it's good, sitting right back there, but it has some qualities about it, right? Or it has some aspects of it, or it does something that does enough to differentiate it from all the other 7s out there. And so it's not quite all the way up to an 8, which is in our case superb, in your case great, right? It doesn't do enough to take it to that next level of great or superb, but it has X, Y, and Z attributes, qualities, whatever word you want to use, that does make it a little better than your average 7. That's where we came up with the half. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying it gives the reviewer
review system's perfect.
A little more nuance.
Yeah, but I actually there is one perfect review system.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes,
that's still the gold standard in my opinion. I honestly feel that. But I guess the way I think about it is that even if it was a 7.9, it's not yet an 8. It's not superb. If it falls short of superb, don't give it the superb one. Then that means it's good, or that means it's honorable in your guys' case. And so that's the way I agree with you. If it falls short of it, then it's living somewhere in that good area. And I don't think the purpose of the score is to give you an impression of how good it is, how much it falls short of superb, right? It's to tell you that it's good, and then you read the article to find out why it's good and why it wasn't superb or why it wasn't a 6.
Yeah,
right?
Fair
what is a 6 for you guys? It's a
we only word 7 through 10.
You only word 6. That's a problem. I think you guys should have some words for, because what do you call it if it's a 1? You say we gave it a 1, and I guess
We
you're
don't really
supposed to
review
know what a
ones.
1 is. You don't? No, you don't.
Well, you got to remember again, right? This goes back
Yeah,
to being a
you're
much
only
smaller
reviewing
outlet.
the.
We're reviewing generally we're reviewing pretty good games.
What's the
But
lowest
we
score
have
you've
had some,
given?
like the lowest. Steve reviewed a game we still joke about to this day called Dust Off Z, which was a bad port of a mobile flying game, and we gave it
Oh,
a 2.
nice. What's the
And
lowest review you've given? Lowest score you've given?
that's a good question. I think a 5. I think
Nice.
I'd have to go back and look.
Do you
Yeah.
remember the game?
No, I recently reviewed Phobia, that horror indie game. I gave that a 6.
Yeah, I read that review actually. I was thinking about getting it, and you talked me out of it. I thought it looked cool via the trailer, and then I was like, it's kind of mid. I guess I won't pick it out. So
It's that's exactly it. It does some things right, but that's why I got a 6, right? It's
yeah.
so but no, generally speaking, I again, I volunteer to review games I generally like. So that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, because you run the. It's a rigged game. He runs the side everyone. He gets to decide what games he reviews, and he chooses the best ones so you can play them early. It's a racket. It's a good racket.
That's not true. That's not true. I don't choose the best ones.
All I'm saying
but
is he
no.
reviewed Elden Ring. A little suspicious. Was it a random drawing to see who could review Elden Ring? I don't think so.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
I think he was sitting on that email for about 2 seconds before he redeemed the code.
That's also true. In fact, I got the code to Elden Ring. This is not a joke. I think me and Luke both got the code to Elden Ring while we were live doing cast co-op. And you can see me go on mute and just go nuts. And I started immediately clicking on my PC to install it so I could play it. Yes.
Hilarious. That's great.
But no, that's so I can see both there. I do continue to like our scale, which you can add that little nuance, but I 100% see the viewpoint that you put forth of, 1 to 10. If you're going to do 1 to 10, make it clear and cut. And funny enough, I want to say there's at least 1 or 2 people that write for us that generally do that themselves anyway. And you have that option, right?
Nice.
So
I wrote for an outlet once that I don't know if I should tell the story.
Yeah, you should now. You already mentioned it.
I wrote for an outlet once. Well, let's just put it this way. I don't write for them anymore. And there's lots of reasons. One, I can write for IGN. Why wouldn't I just write for them instead? But one of the things was they tried to enforce rules about what you could rate a game if it had certain elements in it. Right.
Oof.
So if it had a certain thing in it, it would be like, that's -1 point, and you have to, it's mandated. So like, you give me your score, and then if it has that thing in it, I take 1 point off of it. Right.
What?
Yeah, dude.
What?
It's crazy. And what's funny is I haven't written for them for a while, but I was in their Discord, and I recently saw that they did a thing where you lose 10% of your score if you have NFTs in your game, which, say what you will about NFTs. My theory was, okay, one, if NFTs were a bad influence on the game, wouldn't that be reflected in the review already?
Right.
Like its bad nature would kind of already come out. And two, if they disagreed with that policy, couldn't they just make their review 10% better on score, right, and then it would just invalidate your reduction? I just had so many questions about that rule, but that is like sacrilege to me. That's like, oh, dude, if you're trying to do that. Yeah, I know. As soon as that happened, I was like, all right, I'm out. As soon as you start telling me what my opinion of the game I reviewed is, like, yeah, I'm done. So
that kind of goes, that ties into everything we've said so far, which, from an outlet perspective, right? Like Dan, in your case, and again, much broader effort. But you have to trust the person reviewing the game, right? Like to give their unbiased, valid opinion and be a good writer. And if you can't do that, they shouldn't be reviewing games for you.
Well, unbiased, I'm gonna push back on, because I don't think anybody's unbiased in their opinions.
Not 100%.
You should get their honest opinion, not necessarily unbiased.
That's fair. Honest is a good word there. Yeah. So on the 1 to 10 scale, right? Talking about scoring. Mm-hmm. There's 2 things that we can touch on there. One is, it feels like anecdotally, now we're a little different again because we choose the games we review. We're not huge in that sense, but I would argue that as an industry, there definitely is a leaning to the higher part of the scale, right? Like generally when you look at the reviews, they're like 6 through 9. Like the vast majority of games fall into the 6 to 9. It's like, and the funny thing I think about that is even in my professional career, when you talk about performance for individuals in their jobs, like in very serious jobs, we compare to peers, right? Who are your peers and how are you
And
comparing
they're always
against them?
6 to 9 as well.
Right. That's kind of my
Is it
point.
the
Like,
same? Because nobody wants to say it's 4. Yeah.
No, but we are forced to do so in the professional aspect, right? And my point was going to be like, if you took every title and every title is a 7, or your rating is 7, technically your 7 should be the 5, right? Because that would be your average. If you're using a 1 to 10 scale and 5 is your median.
That's assuming 5 is average.
True. Yeah.
7 is good. So the reason I think most games end up being around a 6 to a 9 is because most games are pretty good, and the ones that are bad typically don't get reviewed because they're bad games and nobody wants to review them.
So I agree with your latter point. Most bad games aren't getting reviewed. I disagree with your first point.
You think so? What is your theory around why they mostly get 6 to 9?
Well, so think about what we're saying, right? If you say most games are good, right? Then if most of something is
I don't say most games are good, but most games that get played are good, and they get played for a reason, if that makes sense, because most games includes like Steam Greenlight games, which nobody plays, right? Like unless they're a rocket ship propelled, like itch.io has like thousands and thousands of games that I've never played before. And so I don't want to say most by volume, but most games that you know about, that you would read about, are like you're reading about them because enough people care that somebody should write a review, or that everyone writes reviews about them. And so I think those end up being 6 to 9s. And it's rare that a game, you're expecting it to be good, it's got a lot of hype behind it, and then you play it and you're like, oh wow, this is like actually not good. It does happen though, but I don't think it happens as often as it's okay. It's a good game. Okay.
No, I think
it's okay at IGN. So yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. I think that's fair. Where I was going, right, is that if you take a subsection of something and you say we have 100 X's, whatever it may be, right? And 80 of them are similar. Like this is your, 80 of them are X, right? Well, really, that's your baseline, because of this group of people, right? The vast majority are here. That should be your 5, because that's your middle ground. That's what it's now expected to be. Does that make sense?
I don't agree that 5 is the middle ground. I'm confused as to why you think that it should average, because at least in my review system, 5 means mediocre.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean average. That just means that it's subpar. It's like it's not even okay. You know what I mean? And I would say that if you took just because most games are good doesn't mean that they're all mediocre. It just means that most of them are good that are reviewed. So I take issue with the conclusion that 5 should be the median, right, score, or the average score. I just think that there are probably lots of 5s out there.
Yeah.
But IGN, they only have so many games they can review. They only have so much money for freelancers like me, and only so much time for their in-house writers that work full time, that they have to choose. Obviously, they're going to review all the good games, and then they're going to review smaller games. They're a little more risky. Hey, we're hearing some good things about this one. Hey, there's a lot of Steam reviews for this game with people playing in early access. Let's review that. And then they pick ones out, and then the ones that are the most risky, they sign me to review. So that's why that seems to be their strategy.
That's the model.
That's the model. Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. I agree with you on, right? Like my point was, if you took all games, right? You took all games.
Sure.
Then you should be able.
I'll say this: if you took all games and you reviewed every single one,
right?
I think most games would be like a 4 or a 5.
That's my point, right?
But that's because that's of all games, and I would say like the reason you don't review those games is because you look at a trailer on YouTube that you posted of that game like a year ago, and it has like 1,000 views, and you're like, why would we review this? There's no interest, right? People don't seem to care about this game, and that hurts me a little bit, because some of those games are probably great and they just fumbled in their.
You just don't find an audience.
Yes, but I think that those games eventually see the light of day, and hopefully we review them late. We review them late once we find out that they're popular or whatever. But I'm sure there's plenty of great games that we've not reviewed. but it's kind of hard. You have to pick your battles, right? And why wouldn't you
No,
review a game with more interest around them than less
that
interest? Yeah.
no, that's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with your point. My theory was that if you took all games, top to bottom, right, that you should be able to create this baseline kind of mid, which would be your fives. But to your point, because even the biggest outlets like IGN that review a lot of games compared to the smaller outlets like SG, which review much fewer games, far fewer games. Like our average on our site, I haven't gone through it, but if I were to go through it, I'm sure it's probably like a 7.5. Yeah, exactly. Somewhere in that high 7 range. And if you look at our open critic, we recommend something like 85% of games, right? Because we're reviewing the better ones, right? It makes sense.
You review the popular ones. Let's say that. Well, you're reviewing the popular ones. You don't know if they're better, but you know they're popular. And I think that what's interesting about that is IGN is one of probably the premier outlet to get accused of overrating, which is something that I think is probably less true of IGN than it is other outlets. I think smaller outlets like yours, who are only reviewing the top 10% of the games that came out that year because they don't have time, probably give a higher overall average. And then outlets like mine that review a wider breadth of games probably end up giving more low scores. I mean, I'm just speaking anecdotally as myself, somebody who reviews a lot of mid or bad games, but I think that's probably true, but it's just, maybe it's the volume, or they only see, or we don't promote the ones that do poorly because we feel like we're sticking a dagger into some poor developers, years of their life or whatever. But it's interesting to me that whole dichotomy, because I wish more people would understand that the reason 7 seems to be the average is because most games are good, or at least most of the ones that you care about are
reviewed.
Good. Yeah. I just feel like that's obvious to me. It's a video game. What's not to like? It's probably going to be good. It's probably going to be fun. It's a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's your exact point. The most succinct way to say it, I think you said it well, which is if the outlets are taking time to review this game, it's most likely going to be above average. It's going to be a good game.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. So I guess on that front, then, do you feel that the 1 to 10 scale still has merit? Because I know some big people that don't. They don't like the 1 to 10 scale.
I think it absolutely does. I think the fact that you're reviewing the most popular games, and most popular games tend to be good, doesn't take away the goodness of that game. And that would be the argument for removing the 1 to 10. Like if you were like, okay, well, the review scale should be 1 to 5, and 1 should be the 6s, and 5 should be the 10s. All you're doing there is reorganizing. Then you're just admitting that we're never going to review a game that's less than a 1.
Yeah, it's the same thing, really.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You're just saying like, hey, let's look at it differently. And it's like, okay, why? You know what I mean? Like if a game is good, you should call it good. And if that's a 1 or a 2 or a 7 or a 2, it doesn't really matter, except for one of them is weird to the reader. 2.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple of sites I know that do 1 to 5 stars with half stars. I'm like, you literally have a 1 to 10 scale.
Yeah, yeah. What was the gaming channel G4? They did that too. G4, they did 5 stars with halves, and I was like, I don't really, because you get what each star means, but when you get to the half stars, you're like, so it's 1 to 10, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it absolutely is useful, and even if the average game is 7s, as I very well know, there are outliers. There are games that get 2s. There are games that get 3s. I have not given a 1 yet, but I know that is going to come. And I think
Xenoblade 3.
Oh God, I'm so glad to report. And here's a preview. It's probably not going to be a 1. Let's put it that way. But I do think it's important, because I think when you give a game a 7, even if that ends up being what most games get, that still has value and merit. Sure. It's still a good game, and it should get the 7. It doesn't make that less of an achievement just because you didn't review all the 1s and 2s. I just think you need the 1s and 2s to remind you how good the 7s are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You need the odd 3 or 4. Now, we talked on Twitter. I want to bring this up because I didn't add it to the run of show, but I'm glad it sort of has brought itself organically, which is my former colleague, Mitch Dyer, who we never were on the editorial team at the same time together. I worked for the parent company at the time he was a writer, but I was friendly with him, right? He said that when he was IGN, he had something of a reputation for underrating games, and that sometimes editors would push back on him, like, really, is that you really think that it's that low of a score? Obviously, I tweeted back at him. I was like, that's not something I've ever experienced, but and he said, good. It sounds like IGN has evolved in lots of ways since I've left, and he has a pretty positive relationship with the team.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's something where I think people should be absolutely free to assign whatever score that they feel is valid. I do think sometimes an editor, and this happens to me sometimes, where I'll assign a score after I write the review, and the person editing my review will read it and go, this really reads like a blank. Right? Like if I was extra hard on the game and then I gave it like a 7, they'll be like, I mean, did you really think it was a 7? Like, look at how many negative words and paragraphs you have here, and look how many, good words and paragraphs you have here. And then they'll kind of get me to question it. I think that is super helpful.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you don't get it right with the first score. Yeah, I'm sure you guys do. Editorial overview is super useful. But I don't think that it's fair to say that somebody's opinion, if they tend to be a more negative person, like let's take a Rick Hogue who gives perfectly good games like Halo Infinite what did he say? It was a bad. I think he said a 4 out of 10.
I don't know.
So which is crazy, right? Like to me, that's like what? But also I would read his review and go, oh, he doesn't know shooters. He doesn't know first person shooters. So then that would be my assessment of his review. But you can review other people's review, by the way. I think that there's got to be some YouTube potential in that.
Reviewing reviews.
Let's do it.
Yeah, you shouldn't have said that out loud. We should have just done that off the cuff.
We should have just done it off, giving it away. But yeah, I think that's wrong. And in my experience with IGN, there's never been any of that. I mean, I've given games 2s, and people have read my review and been like, "Yeah, no, it sounds like a really bad game. Give that sucker a 2." Like I think the only time that they might push back on you, and maybe you have experience with this as an editor, which I don't have experience as an editor, is that sometimes you read somebody's review and then you see their score and you're kind of like, something's off here.
Yep.
And you kind of want to or you read somebody's review and go, I don't think they did a good job of explaining why it's that. And so if their score is a 2, maybe they just need some coaching into like giving better reasoning or putting more examples or something like that. Because if they actually feel that way, I think it's up to the editor to draw out why they feel that way and make the review read like that, rather than to say, are you sure you felt that way? You know what I mean?
That's fair.
Although sometimes that can be helpful too. Sometimes you can just do a reality check with the person. So.
Yeah, and funny enough, I bring up a recent example which may kind of play with some of the people listening, is Diablo Mortal. So when Nate, who reviewed that for us, is a avid Diablo player, tons of hours in it, right? Knows the game mechanics well, plays mobile games. He kind of has all this background in where Diablo Immortal should play. And he brought me the review and finished it. He took a couple weeks post-launch. He put tons of hours into it. Brought me the review and he gave it a 4. And I said, okay, pretty tough score, right?
Yeah.
I
hear, by the way, I talked to him. He was like,
well, the funny thing is, critically, it's pretty highly rated. And now we know the story has kind of evolved over time, And when I had the conversation with him like 2 weeks post-launch, what he pointed out to me was, okay, you can play this, you can play the campaign. And he described that well in his review. But he said, Diablo at its core is about once you get to the end game, and we all know this all too well, right? The time that you can spend building and customizing and all these other things. And he said that is literally destroyed in this game because you cannot do it in just time investment. As we've all come to find out from all these articles over the past couple of weeks on the criticisms of Diablo Immortal. And so when we talked through it, I was like, if you're very confident in the score and this is what you want to give it, you've put a lot of time in, and I would argue few people know that genre and those types of games better than him. I said, let's roll with it. And we gave it a 4. And we're one of the lowest critical reviews of that game out there, because a lot of places gave it like 8 and 9s.
Yeah. And hey, those people's opinions are valid. They may be less informed. They may have not cared as much about the end game as this person. Maybe they maybe they were taking it at face value, like, hey, play through it, get to the end credits, and
you do the campaign, and that's my experience.
And if that was your expectation, fine. I think both of those viewpoints are valid, and I think that you should read both of those reviews and find out where you land. Because if I was playing Diablo Immortal, frankly, I would only want to play to the end credits. So if that's an 8, I'm in. Like, sign me up. That sounds
Yep.
fun. But if I was the type of player looking for an end game and I read that the end game isn't much, I would have been like, oh, that hurts my score in my brain a lot, right? It's like telling me that I'm going to play an MMO with no end game. It's like,
right.
well,
Yeah.
what's
What
the
am I
point,
investing
right?
the time for?
Yeah, exactly. So I could see both sides of that argument. I think they're totally valid, which maybe is a good transition to one of the other topics, which was kind of the qualities of what makes a good reviewer as like a person, like who should be reviewing
Who
games
should review
and
it? Yes.
who should review games and what should their qualifications be, and are some reviewers less qualified or more qualified to review games than others? Are some opinions more valid than others? Should there be a weighted system on Metacritic where certain reviewers get more weight for their score than others because they're just better reviewers? You know, well, I mean, hey, if you're going to argue that some reviewers are more qualified,
and Metacritic does that. If you did know, Metacritic gives their weighting involves a weighting by outlet, which gives higher weight to places like IGN and probably others versus others. See, I don't like that.
I know you don't. You're on the bad end of it. I was being facetious.
Well, it's not necessarily the bad end, but to the broader question. And you and I have we've talked about all this. I don't know why I keep saying
this is one of the areas we disagree. So I'm excited for this part.
Yeah. So my general thought, and
you are a general thought.
I don't think that a lot of what we're talking about here is very hard line, right? There's a lot of nuance and kind of gray area in what we're talking about. Yeah. So I generally think that if you're reviewing a game, a specific game, that you should have some experience with that genre, and or that if it's a franchise, especially a long running one, that you should have experience with that franchise. So for instance, I'll try to think of a decent example. If you are reviewing Dragon Quest 11, right? You should have some kind of knowledge of Dragon Quest. You should have some kind of knowledge of JRPGs, and you should be able to speak to it from that perspective. However, I will add from the outset that, and you and I have discussed this too, which is it depends, going back to our beginning of this conversation, which is you also have to think about the audience you're writing for, right? So there's going to be the people who read that review who have never played Dragon Quest and know nothing about it. And there's going to be the people who are hardcore Dragon Quest people looking for that experience. Now, I've already said that us being an indie outlet, seasoned gaming, with the direction of being a more hardcore audience, we do tailor our reviews in that way. So when Halo Infinite comes out, right, I review it because I'm a Halo diehard, and I can speak to the people that know what they want from a Halo game, right? I'm not saying that's right across the board, because someone who's never, let's say if you're the person out there who's been playing Apex Legends for 3 years and you go into Halo Infinite, that's going to be a very different experience, right? And I'm not speaking to that. So I'll stop there, but I know we've talked about this before, and you said that I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think to some degree you feel sometimes that if someone is too close to a franchise, that it can do a little bit of a disservice to the review, because you don't have that outside perspective that others may have.
Yeah, it's more that you're a person writing in a bubble and trying to tell people who aren't in the bubble whether they like the game or not. And sometimes that means that you are serving a very small audience. If you're seasoned gaming, I feel like that's your goal. Your goal is to serve like a niche audience, because that's how you win with your outlet, is that you find that hardcore audience and then you just control them and you gear all your content toward them. For someone like IGN, I think sometimes that might hurt you a little bit. Not always. Like if you're a good writer and you know a lot about Halo and you have been a friend of the franchise for years, hopefully you have enough perspective to include in your review, like, hey, even if I was a first-time player, the story makes sense, and you realize that that's a good thing, right? Versus, if you haven't read the 31 Halo novels, you're completely not going to understand the story of Halo Infinite, which I kind of agree with that statement more than the first one. And if that's the case, then hopefully, even if you're a Halo diehard, you go, that's kind of a problem. That said, I do believe in expertise. I do believe that your experience with a genre. I'll give you a great example. Whatever the most recent Dragon Age game was, there was a guy who Dragon Quest, sorry.
11. Yep.
11, yeah. Whatever that, it might not have been that franchise. It might have been one of the Tales. Oh, it was that. No, was it? I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was one of the well-known Japanese series, right? Like
Okay.
a Japanese RPG, like Dragon Quest, and
Yep.
we got somebody, a freelancer on the IGN team, to agree to review it, and then they got through the entire game, sent the first draft of the review, and then that is when the people that assigned the review realized that this person had not played any of the other games because they basically talked about it in the review. And so the IGN people paid what is known in the industry as a kill fee, which is, I've been paid a kill fee before, which is when they pay you to not write the rest of the review and not finish it. They pay you to kill the project. I have not had it killed because of something that crazy where like I was just the wrong reviewer. I typically only agree to review games or only get asked to review games that they know I have expertise in. In my case, it was I was reviewing Disco Elysium.
Okay.
A fantastic game
Yes.
that they gave me because no one knew it was going to be fantastic. And the person who they had originally signed it to started playing it, and then they said, I'm actually kind of busy. They were a staffer, and they were like, I'm kind of busy. Can you find a freelancer to do this? So they gave it to me. I got about 15 hours through the game, and then the person who had originally gotten the review for it started playing it more and was like, whoa, this is a really good game. I have to write it. And so my editor reached out to me and said, can we pay you a kill fee for how much you've played the game so far? And we're going to let this other person write it because we don't have to pay them because they're a staffer, right? They're on salary. And so that was my kill fee. But yeah, in that example, it was a miscommunication where they were like, hey, do you have experience with, JRPGs like Dragon Quest? And they were like, yeah. And then they wrote the review, and then they realized, actually, it seems like he doesn't have experience with this franchise, and it has a lot of story that you have to have known to make sense. And so they decided to kill it. And so I think that was the right call, because in that specific scenario, it probably would have been a disservice to review it purely from the stance of somebody with no information. But I do think that there is a valid 100% real opening for people to review games who are new to the franchise, because I personally would want to know their opinion. And most gamers are young people who maybe haven't played Dragon Quest 1 through 10 because they were way too young to have played that game. And so I think most people reading a Dragon Quest 11 review probably haven't played Dragon Quest 1 through 10. And so if you're trying to serve more people, there is an argument to be made that there is some content as an outsider. The one caveat I would say is that if you're going to write that review, you should state that in your review. And the outlet should be comfortable. The outlet should be comfortable saying, this is our review from the perspective of somebody who hadn't played the other ones, and own that. And I don't think that's bad. I think that it is good to have those perspectives. I would love to see first person who's ever played a Halo game be Halo Infinite and then review that game, because I do think that is a valuable. Not only would I be interested in reading it because I don't have that perspective, and that would just be interesting to me, but also because I imagine there's a huge amount of players who saw it on Game Pass and were like, I've never played a Halo game. I bet you there's a whole bunch of people.
Probably. Yeah.
So, I think it would be interesting in both regards, but I have a problem a little bit with the gatekeeping on who can review a game. I really do. And I think the one that really bothers me is skill. When somebody say, oh, you have to be skillful enough. I think we got into
What does that even mean?
Like, we got into a Twitter argument about a button masher versus a pro,
Me and you did?
player. Yeah.
I don't even remember this.
You don't remember? This is a couple weeks ago. So somebody said this guy was clearly
a fighting game. Yes.
Game.
Yeah.
Yes. We started talking about it, and I kind of said, well, just because he's not good at fighting games doesn't mean he doesn't know a lot about fighting games. I know a lot about fighting games. I've played a lot of fighting games. I've even reviewed some fighting games. But I would not describe myself as somebody who goes and wins championships. Somebody who wins championship games would know more about fighting games than me. But you have to keep in mind, most people aren't at that skill level who are playing Mortal Kombat 10. And so I think there's an argument to be made that a regular Joe Schmo who has played a lot of fighting games and knows about them, but isn't, a God's gift to fighting games, I think there's an argument that person's more valuable than the sweaty tryhard who, can wipe the floor with everyone in the matchmaking system. So I have a real problem with that, because I think it's not helpful from a review perspective. And it's also a bit of a negative gatekeeping, if you're not this skillful, then you shouldn't even try to play this game. So this review is not even geared toward you, and we're going to keep you out of it. And to me, I have a really hard time getting on board with that train, even though I understand, obviously, somebody who's very good at something probably has a little bit more knowledge. Although that's not necessarily true. I know people who are really good at shooters, like 11-year-olds who know nothing about shooters and don't know why it's good or mechanics, but they can snipe you in Fortnite, but they have no context for like why the game's good. They're just good at it. So I don't even agree with that. I just think the most important thing is your knowledge and experience and expertise more than your skill or your, bona fides as a gamer or as a gamer with that genre or being a tryhard or whatever. So that's my soapbox on that.
Yeah.
one.
So I would generally agree with you again. I think we're agreeing more than we might have realized coming into this. I generally agree with that. I think that, again, we've touched on it a few times that you've kind of fell in a couple gray areas there, right? So one is that it goes back to depending on who the audience is for review, right? And someone reading probably a fighting game review at Season Gaming is going to be much more hardcore than someone generally reading a fighting game review at IGN.
Hardcore in gaming, maybe, but maybe not necessarily hardcore in the fighting game genre. And so that's kind of where I think
Could be.
You make a lot of assumptions, right? Because I would consider myself a hardcore gamer, obviously,
Yes.
but I'm not super hardcore in fighting games. I'm pretty
Right.
well versed, but I'm not like I don't know how to string crazy combos together and kill somebody.
That's the point I'm actually going toward.
Right. Yeah. So
that's the point I'm going towards, because then even within the genre, right? Fighting games are, and I think every genre kind of has this, but fighting games are a pretty distinct genre in the gaming universe, right? And I would say there are people who truly enjoy fighting games, and then there are people who will never touch a fighting game. And that's probably true of all genres, I realize. But I would say something like a first-person shooter or an action-adventure game are more broad in their audience than, say, a fighting game. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But
sometimes that can work against you, like how people who really are into Dark Souls games or Souls-like games will get into that and go, oh, this is a 10 out of 10 game. And then somebody who has never played a Souls game will be like, 10 out of 10. That game has a really bad story. Like that matters in a review, right? And then they'll just be like, oh, well, that's part of the genre. So both valid opinions, but it's sort of like, is the less experienced person less valid? Because I kind of see their perspective on that. And
I don't know. I don't know if less valid. Yeah, I don't know if less valid would be fair. What I would say is that fighting games in particular, and this, again, it can be kind of spread across different genres too, because we can even bring this back to Halo Infinite. But let's stay on fighting games for a second, which is they are so specific in the competitive sense, right? Most of them are one-on-one. So you talk about not only the one-on-one mechanics and the mechanics of the fighting game itself, right? But then you talk about the experience of the online competitive sense, because that's a big deal in fighting games. And the net code in that game, how it's structured, what that looks like, is a big deal to a lot of people that play those games. So I think what we were talking about on Twitter is that Elu reviewed DNF Duel, which is a game I have zero knowledge on. None, right? And so
it's a fighting game.
Yeah, it's a fighting game, and it has specific mechanics and characters and all this stuff, right? And my perspective was that the person writing about that should at least understand the nuance of the mechanics of that fighting game, because fighting games themselves can be very different from one another, and be able to speak to that intelligently.
Yeah, Soul Calibur versus Street Fighter, very
huge difference, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you really get deep into it with fighting games, you start to get into, well, there's different frame animations here, and they go crazy with it, right? So I don't think you need to get to that level, because then you're talking about
exactly. That's not helpful, though. That's not helpful information when you're talking about is the game good or bad. But that opinion is valid. The opinion of that person that's that hardcore. I just question: is it doing a disservice to the reader if it's coming from somebody who's so in the niche, so in the bubble, that their perspective is not going to be shared by 99% of the players out there? And so I would almost say, like, it should be the person who is a little deadly. They can win. They're not pure button mashing, but they're also more like me than not me. They learn a few tricks and then they kind of just repeat them. That's what I do in fighting games, right? I'll just like, oh, that was a cool combo. I'm going to do that a bunch and kind of stick with that. So I think that review is like more helpful if your goal is to reach the widest audience and inform them and help them in their purchasing decision and the time that they're spending in their gaming hours. So
I would
yeah,
agree. And I think that you are going to reach the broader audience that way. The only thing I would add, and the reason I mentioned Halo Infinite again, right, is there's the percentage of a community in a lot of these competitive games, and Halo's just the one I refer to because I know it best, right?
yeah,
That
it's
we
your
know,
community.
that we know that once you get into the competitive scene of Halo is a very different scene than the person logging in to just have fun with big team battle with their friends, right?
Yeah.
And all I was saying is that I believe that there is some benefit to having that perspective as part of your write-up. Like if you can provide what you're saying, the broader kind of overview of the game, everything we've talked about so far, but you can also add insight, say, if you're the type of person who enjoys this aspect of the game, here's what you'll find. I could find benefit in that. But I also, conversely, which is funny, right? I do take your point that if you are the type of person who can speak to that detailed of the aspect of the game, you may not be as good as speaking to the broader aspect of the casual setting.
Exactly. You might
So
be a
it's
little blind. You have blinders on sometimes when you're that in deep and you're just like, oh, it's good because it does this and this and this. And then somebody else will be like, yo, it doesn't have any tutorial.
Yeah. I don't care about what he's talking about, but
I reviewed Destiny, and one of the things I always include in my Destiny reviews is like, I make a new character. I have an alt account, and I'll make a new character, and I'll see what the new experience is. And when that's bad, I include it in my review. I'll be like, "There's still no way for new players to get in here." And people will be like, "Travis, you have 5,000 hours in Destiny. Why would you write what the new player experiences is?" Because I think about that, and I think, dude, if I'm recommending this to somebody who has never played Destiny before, I am leading them into a minefield, of just like disappointment because it's such a bad new player experience. So. I think that's something to keep in mind. And obviously you can train really, really niche minds that are super hardcore to be aware of the broader stuff. Like I'm sure you're pretty good at that with Halo. Like you're super in deep, but you can also relate to the person and remember to give a shout out to the person who has no idea what's happening in Halo Infinite story and is confused by the opening cutscene.
Yeah.
Right. That's totally possible, but that takes training. And I think it's less prevalent and less reflected in the score when you have somebody who's super in the bubble. So I just think both are valid. I would like to see both of those opinions get turned into reviews for different outlets, yada, yada. So.
Well, and that actually ties back to kind of what we said at the beginning, which is there is benefit, right? Either beginning to develop a relationship as a reader with reviewers who you trust and know what their opinions are in terms of certain games, right? Or if you haven't developed that yet, going to your aggregate sites and getting a broad view, right, of what an opinion of a game is.
Yeah, I wouldn't read a Halo Infinite review from Hogue any more than I would read a Breath of the Wild review from you. You know what I mean? Like I know what your guys' opinions are on those games, and I'm going to be like, no, those are both not my opinions. I'm going to find my news somewhere
Except
else.
mine's right. So
I don't know about that. I don't know. I'm actually in between you and Hogue. I don't think it's God's gift to games, but I certainly think you're overly hard on that game.
I am. And I know that, of course, but
well, dude, it's so much easier to be hard on a game when everyone else around it is just like fawning over it. I know how that is, man. You get indignant. You're like, these guys, it's not even that good,
No, you're missing the point. Like,
yeah, exactly. I was like that with Stranger Things the other week when we were talking about that. Everybody was so on it. I was just like, dude, it's just okay in my book. Like, and then that made me turn it into,
me with that.
It's bad, Like
I'm literally almost,
sorry, man.
I'm almost through season 4 again. And
you're watching it again?
As I watch it, I've watched the whole series again over the past 2 weeks.
D&D.
But as I've watched it again, I'm like, this season's good, man. It's really damn good.
I will say I like Vecna, and I think I was overly harsh on it in that episode of our show. You guys were going so hard on it. I was like, somebody's got to be the voice of dissent. I'm just gonna go as hard as I can against it. But I did like the show. I just don't think it's. I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10 or whatever Hogue gave it.
I am watching. I started Barry because I've heard great things.
So good.
Okay.
I love that show.
I like it so far. I'm like 4 episodes in. It's good so far.
He's a good actor. I was like surprised. I was like, he's actually good. It's kind of crazy. Bill Hader.
Neat role for him to play.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Where were we? Yeah.
One of the other, I think maybe the last big topic that you hear people argue about reviews, which is crazy to me, is does a game need to be finished? God, I keep kicking my camera. I'm sorry. I keep stretching my foot.
Stand underneath your.
It's on a tripod in front of me, and but
interesting.
I've got this damn boot on, and I keep stretching, and I keep hitting it by
You
accident.
don't have a clamp under your desk for the camera?
No, I do for the mic now.
Okay, gotcha.
That's what the mic's here. But anyway, do games need to be finished to be reviewed? And this is one of the things I'm most hardline on, both personally and for not only the crew at SG, but in taking reviews seriously. If this is a game, and you're already smiling. So
hardline on which side?
It's got to be finished. Period. If it's a game that has a story, that has a clear-cut beginning and end, this should kind of go without saying. There's some, come on, use your head here, right? If it's a Madden franchise, that's different than, something else. But if you're talking about a game like Plague Tale, I finally found a good example, right? Don't play 40% of Plague Tale and then give me a review. Don't do that. That's not a review. You're not reviewing the experience.
I am in violent agreement with you on this one. So this is another one where we agree. I have this thing. So somebody was posting and being a total just annoying personality on Twitter going, I can't believe an outlet would ever ask you to play an entire 80-hour game in like 2 weeks and then write a review. I've almost never finished the games that I've written reviews for, and I'm proud of it, and blah, blah, blah. And like posted these things. That
makes me turn red. With anger.
Dude. So I read that chain, and my response was, I think I retweeted him, and I said, yeah, man, totally. I wrote a review of the first part 1 of the Titanic and said that it was a lighthearted rom-com with low stakes. Like it's you can't do half of something and then give a definitive review of it. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's like saying, I love this new album from this group. The first 3 songs are amazing. It's like,
yeah.
What about the other 10?
Exactly. Well, you could give reviews of each of the songs, I guess. IGN does that for TV shows. We review episodes of TV shows,
right?
All the episodes, and then we give a final score to the whole season. I think you could do that in a video game if it was episodic, like we used to do that with
Telltale game.
Telltale games, exactly. Yeah. But I think that it's just really hard to slap a review score on something that you haven't seen the end credits of.
Yep.
I do have a couple caveats, and I think maybe we disagree on them because I think I recall us talking about this before, which is I think early access games should be reviewable, and I think that they should be reviewable because they're being sold to someone. They're asking for your money. About that. Yep. Yeah, and once they are, I say it's all up for grabs. I'll review you again when you're fully released if people still care about you at that time. But there's this thing where developers will say, oh, we're still early access. Don't review us yet. And then they'll be early access for 3 years. And then by the time they come out, they've already gotten all the money and nobody cares about the game enough for it to get a review. And so it never gets its time in the sun for somebody to judge it. And I really, really don't like that. And so my philosophy is if you're selling your game, it's time for us to look at the review. If it's an early access and it's free, totally different story. I think that it's fair for you to develop your game with input from people. But if you're asking for money, you get a review. And I will review your game again.
I would just say that it should be mentioned that the game is in quote
early access. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. And so what we'll do is say like early access review. We put it in the title, the headline, that it's that. And we did that with Temtem, the Pokemon clone game. You hear about that one? It's been very popular online. It got kickstarted, had a lot of success, but they kickstarted it, so they were immediately asking for people's money. And when the first version of the preview came out, we reviewed it, and then a year later, it's still in early access, and I reviewed it the second time IGN reviewed it. And so the game is fully coming out this fall, and assuming that it does well, there's going to be a third review for the game. I think that's it working as intended, right? You get to hear about it at every point in the process, but the caveat there is that it still has to have an audience. If it doesn't have an audience, then you're kind of just howling into the wind at that point. So I'm a big fan of doing the review. The other thing is...
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, okay, cool. So we're good there. The other thing is that just like how we were talking about Diablo, I think sometimes when people say that they completed a game, they're being a little bit disingenuous because they can get to end credits and the game actually starts at the end credits, right? Like if I reviewed Destiny 2 The Witch Queen after the campaign credits, the entire community would be like, what did you do? Like, that's crazy, because the game has a raid, it has like all this other stuff. And so I think that completing a game has different definitions of different people. I think that there's an argument that somebody could review The Witch Queen after beating just the campaign, but as somebody who knows a lot about the franchise and knows that that's not really the full scope of the game, I wouldn't feel comfortable reviewing the game at that state. And I wouldn't want to read a review that didn't, unless it was a review of just the campaign, which I think is a fair thing. If you make it clear that that's
you have to call that
only
out,
reviewing the campaign and not the end game, because you're not an end game player. Similar to Hogue suggested, I would like there to be reviews of the first 5 hours of a video game, just so that I know if the first 5 hours is good. And here's the thing. I think that that's a good idea, but I think that it has to be a YouTube channel titled First 5 Hour Review or something like that, where it's like very clear that that's what they're doing.
Well, sure.
There's got to be an audience for people who are too busy and just want to know how the beginning is. Because if you just play the beginnings of games, there's got to be a whole audience of people who only get through the first 5 hours of a game. Like Hogue says, he's one of those people. So it's like, yeah, you should review the first 5 hours. That sounds hilarious. But it would have to be branded that way. You can't sell it as your definitive review of the whole game.
Well, and it's such a weird thing too, because the first 5 hours of a game could be 10% of a game, or it could be 90% of a game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it does. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. Like,
yeah, I 100% agree with that. I just think like the reason I support that is because I think there's a valid. I'm one of those people who really hates it when games don't value your time, or shows or movies or whatever, right? And so if a game doesn't get good after 10 hours, that to me is so frustrating. And so I almost feel like there should be a separate outlet that's just grading what are the first 10 hours? How long does it take for this thing to get good? So that Final Fantasy 14 can get a 1 out of 10, and games that respect your time.
You just reminded me. That's actually one of our, remember you at the very beginning of this, you were talking about Season Gaming's minor scores.
Yeah.
Our other one I didn't mention is time investment. So we call that out. To just give you a kind of general idea of
what does a higher score mean?
No. It's not a score. It's like telling you if
the hours.
Yeah, if you want to complete this game, you're looking at 25 hours or 40 hours or 5 hours, etc. Just to give you a ballpark.
Yeah, we include that in IGN, but we include it in the body. We'll say like over my 12 hours of getting through the game or whatever, however long it took. In Xenoblade's case, most likely 200 hours. We call it out, but that's interesting that you include a runtime. I think that's certainly something that people immediately care about. So it probably deserves its own little,
And it can vary, right? Like there's literal ones we have NA on, like not available because it would be like NHL 22. Yeah, Rocket League, exactly. It's like, well, you're just a match is 5 minutes long, but you can play 4 million of them. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Fortnite. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I think that's fair. I also, it just disappeared. My brain disappeared again. I was going to agree with something that you said earlier.
No, I think we're in really stern agreement here. And I will tell you, like, one of my main rants, like I talk to other content creators, as we both do. We talk to other people that review games, and when I review a game, I always get curious. One thing that we haven't talked about, right, is when reviewing a game, if you're playing it before embargo, you're in good shape because there's no scores out there. Now, as a small outlet, sometimes we'll review games post-release, right? And then you already have a Metacritic out there, and we have to talk to each other to say, hey, you can't let this guide you got to kind of put that to the side, right? But one thing that I do is when I review a game and I publish my score and put it out there, I'm very curious to see what other people thought of the game, which I'm sure we all are, right? And I get very, 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 very annoyed when I see, no matter what the score is, high or low, when I read a review and you can tell they didn't play the whole game. It just drives me bonkers. Drives me nuts. Like Biomutant is famously a game I get crap for because I gave it a high score. On Metacritic, it's a lower score. But like I specifically know in the Kotaku review of that game, they said they played it for 14 hours. The game is like a 40-hour game. So you're literally in your review telling people that you played less than half of the game and then gave it a 6 or something like that. Does didn't
Kotaku
even
score their game now? I thought they could yes or no.
They gave it, I don't know, whatever it was. Right. And there was a video, it might have been Skill Up actually. Or someone gave it like a 4 or 5 and they played like 15 hours. It's like, how are you scoring a game that you've played less than half of? That's not right. You shouldn't be doing that.
I agree with that. And I think for viewers out there wondering, both Seasoned Gaming and IGN compel their writers to finish the entire game before
This is very true. We do not publish a review until it's complete.
We talked about that earlier. That is a hard and fast rule for you, as it is for us. Our rule is you have to finish the game, and you have to, if it has multiplayer, you have to put at least 10 hours into multiplayer.
Oh, that's a good rule. Yeah, we don't have a hard line there, but obviously it would be expected that you play the multiplayer.
So if the game only has multiplayer, typically you'd want to do at least 15 hours, a little bit more if it's just a purely multiplayer game. But that is
Dead is a good example recently, right?
You know what? I actually have always wanted to be like you with Biomutant, but I never am. Anytime I review a game, I never look at the Metacritic, and then I look at the Metacritic after my review's out, and I'm right in the middle. I'm apparently just the most moderate person ever. Even when I gave Postal 4 a 2 out of 10. I went to the Metacritic and its score was 2 because GameSpot gave it a 1 and somebody else gave it a 3. And I was like, damn it, how the hell am I in the middle again? So I every time even when I give crazy scores and I'm like, I believe in this, so I know that this is my opinion and I don't think it's going to be the popular one, I always check Metacritic and I'm right in the middle. It's unbelievable. So yeah, I'm waiting for the day where I'm going to be the outlier, but it just has not happened to me yet.
That's the one that I always get crap for from friends because I was high. And the funny thing is, before I publish it,
did you review Breath of the Wild?
No.
Oh, okay. I would have loved to see that because that would have been, people would still be DMing you if you read Breath of the Wild and you give it like, what would it be for you? A 5 or 4?
I'm not that low on it. No, not because that goes back to, at least, even if it's not my favorite thing in the world, right? Being able to recognize some of the things it does, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that game would be, if I was being completely honest, it would be probably in the 7 to 7.5 range.
Okay.
Yeah, which is still very low compared to the meta. But
I got hate mail for giving Xenoblade an 8. It's crazy. An 8 was too low for these people. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So.
Well, I gave Biomutant a 9, which is high, right? And the funny thing is, before I published my review, and it was pre-embargo, and just in a DM, I said to other people, I said, I think I'm going to be high on this because I could recognize some of the things in the game that I knew it was going to get picked on for, right?
Those things just didn't matter as much to you because you just enjoyed the experience overall. Yeah, that's a valid opinion.
And I tried to explain in a review, like, here's why this game is so meaningful to me. But that's why I get so angry when I see someone say, like, well, they got a 6 over here when they say they played 15 hours of it. You know what I mean? Like, well, you didn't experience the things that I said made this game meaningful.
And I'm sure some people gave it a 6 and played the entire time.
Probably true.
The gripes that you saw mattered more to them than they did for you. That's 100% valid.
That's the opinion aspect of it.
Biomutant is your Earth Defense Force. It's like, you know what I mean? Like the stuff that other people thought was bad didn't really bother you, and the stuff that was good really resonated with you. And so that's, Earth Defense Force is probably a more extreme example. But you know what's messed up about that is I gave my really good review of Earth Defense Force right in the middle. Right in the middle. There were some people who liked it more than me, or some people who liked it less. I was right in the middle again. So yeah, I want to be an outlier one day.
Yeah, I don't have many outliers because, again, I review limited games and they're usually very good. But that was one that I can think of where it was funny to be. I would actually like just to feel what it's like. Maybe, I don't know, to review a very popular, highly rated game and give it a lower score.
You can do it at any time. There's nothing.
Oh, I know, but I'm honest about stuff. But that'd be pretty funny. Maybe I'll review Breath of the Wild too.
Yeah, do it. But it might surprise you, and then you would be eating your own words if you gave it a super high review. Yeah, it could be
no matter what. I would be honest about it. But that goes back to our conversation. Like, I don't think I'm the right person to review Breath of the Wild 2. Yeah. I'm just not. I'm not the Zelda person.
I heard. Yeah, but you do know a lot about it, right?
I do.
So,
and I've played.
I think that's valid. I think you can. I'm a little my overall attitude toward JRPGs is a little I don't like a lot of them, right?
I'm the same way.
Certain things they do, and so when I review them, I'm coming from the perspective of there's some that I absolutely adore, like Persona 4. I love Lost Odyssey.
Wait, you love Persona 4, but not 5?
Yeah, 5 really.
Wow.
We can get into it, but 4 does some things that I think that were really good at the time, and then 5 just refuses to evolve, even though 20 years had passed. So, yeah, I have some problems with that game. But there's some that I really love, but then there's others that just really bother me, and I don't write excuses for them. I don't wave it off as part of the genre, and people have a problem with that. But to your point about being honest, either way, I'd be honest. You said, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny to me because some people go like, Travis, you're so good at writing reviews, or you suck at writing reviews, or whatever their opinion is. To me, it's like, all I did was say what I thought of the game.
Yeah.
That's like, it's foolproof. Like, how could I screw that up? Which is why it's so funny when IGN went through the plagiarism thing for a review. That's what, because what was crazy to me about that is that reviews are the easiest piece of writing you could do in the games industry. Because all you have to do is play something and then say what you thought. There's no way to do it wrong. Like you could say like Halo Infinite is, you could have all of Hoag's opinions that are unhinged and not reflected anywhere on Metacritic, and that's still a correct opinion technically, even though it's not one I respect. It's still it's an opinion that you can't get wrong. And so when we went through that whole thing, it was just such a surreal experience, because I was like, how do you F up a review?
Yeah, like why would you need to plagiarize a review?
Why would you need to plagiarize what your opinion was? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even make sense. It's like the question was, how do you feel about this thing? And
do you like waffles? Well, let me ask. Let me ask Travis.
Does he like waffles? You know what I mean? It's just such a crazy experience to me. Yeah.
It's too funny, man. So, gosh, I think we've covered kind of all the major
everything. We had some other things about like what should and shouldn't be considered in a review. So I have a few nitpicks about this that people ask me about a lot.
Yeah.
So one is, should the price be considered? You see this a lot online.
You do.
Oh, it's pretty good for a discount game.
Yeah. It's like it's a 6, but because it's a $40 game, it's an 8. And it's like, no,
hate it. Oh,
that's not right.
No. So here's the problem I have with that is it's a logical fallacy, because the price you pay for something does not make it more enjoyable. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. It doesn't impact the quality of the game. Just that is objectively true, right? So you might feel better about your purchase if you paid more money for it, but it doesn't impact the quality of the game. And so I have 100%. A problem with the price thing.
I've played $10 games that are way better than $60 games.
I've played free games.
That's true too. Yeah.
Fortnite is free. You know what I mean? Like you can play Warzone. You can play Rocket League is free for most players right now.
Well, and the price isn't static. Someone may look at that review a year later when the game is a third of the price. Like, it's
wow, this guy was really hard on it for a $10 game. Well, it doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah,
so I have that one. That's pretty funny. So if any of you are wondering out there, money is no object. It does not matter in games. Also, I have to shout this out because I feel a lot of people forget it. $10 means different things to different people.
Very much.
You are a high school student who's cherishing every dollar that you managed to grift after someone, like I was in high school, right? It was just like I was out in the streets running cons trying to get money before games, right? And if you have that $10, that could mean the world to you. And if you come from money and you were born when your daddy owned 10 houses, then it could not matter at all. And so I think that's another reason to sort of just get rid of that idea altogether. It just doesn't impact the quality. Another one is circumstances of the game's development. People like to say, well, the game was good considering it was made from 30 people. I think that's a fair thing to say in general. Like, wow, it's pretty impressive 30 people made that. That's totally fine opinion to have. Again, should not impact the review.
Separate from the review.
Quality. Yes. Separate from the review. It does not impact the quality of the review. And so I really have a problem with people who go, dude, it was made by one person, like step off, like it's stop being so hard on the game. And I just go, look, I'm not stepping on him. I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff that the game doesn't do well.
It's still a product that was put out there for consumption.
Right. And again, you have to distance yourself from it. This is one of the joys of working for a large organization versus when I worked for indie outlets. When I wrote for indie outlets, there was always a little bit of like, yo, slow your roll a little bit. We want to still have a relationship with this developer.
Yeah, see,
right?
I don't do that. That's
I'm sure because you just don't care. You're a renegade. Yeah, you're a renegade shepherd.
No, honestly, what it is, we are a non-monetized site, right? So I don't think about that stuff. Like
But if
here,
you burn the bridge, they won't give you a review code for their
okay.
next game. Yeah. So my point is that you're still
My
taking
point is
a
we're
stance.
not losing money.
Perfect. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It gives us
You're
the
losing
freedom
money.
to not think
Maybe
about that.
you're losing access, but you've just decided
Good.
that it's worth the risk in order to be honest. And
Sure.
not every outlet makes that decision. Some outlets
It's
go,
true.
"Yo, we think that this writer is being too harsh and might ruin our relationship with, for example, Nintendo, somebody who can be a little bit sensitive about their reviews and can be really quick to put you on a blacklist and that sort of thing." And so,
Yeah.
in that case, I think there's a little trepidation there. One of the joys of working for a large outlet is that's not my department. The editorial team has no relationship with the developer. We, that we have people that are selling them ads and maintaining a relationship with a separate team, but it's not like, I got to talk to Brian on, the development team at Naughty Dog and be like, Brian, I really didn't like Uncharted 4. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to do that. It's completely sterile.
No,
And
because IGN has the weight, right? Like no matter what your viewpoint is, you
no matter
guys are so
what,
heavy in the industry that
people are going to read a review, even if they refuse to give us a code, and some outlets have, which only really hurts them because it just means their exposure
exactly.
goes way down. And even if that was on the table, us getting taken off of their list or whatever, I wouldn't know about that because I'm on the editorial team and I don't deal with any of the management or PR or people selling them ads or any of that stuff. I used to back when I worked for their parent company, but those days are behind me, sir. I am now a writer. So
let me add another aspect. So you said the circumstances of a game's development shouldn't matter, and I agree with you. The other thing that drives me crazy, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. It's not on the list, but it just came to me as you said that. One of the things I've seen pop up recently when people are trying to make a point of negativity about a game is they'll say, well, it was supposed to have this, but that content was cut. And the argument I make back to that is I'm reviewing what's in the game. There are
a hypothetical world where they got, it's insane.
They might have said 6 years ago that they hope to add wall running in the game. Cyberpunk's a good example here, right? Wall running in the game. It's not in the game. I'm not reviewing it, but I'm also not going to detract directly because wall running's not in the game. It's not in the game. So there's this
the same thing with No Man's Sky, right? There were all these promises about what was going to be in it. Yeah.
Which, ends up with
That's
a result
bad,
of what the game is. Yeah, you're still reviewing what the content is. I think it was Carl at SG. He was trying to make a point of Halo the other day. And he's like, well, they said they cut 60% of what was supposed to be in the Infinite campaign. And I said, 60% in this equation is just a number that's thrown out there. 2, you don't even know what that content is. And 3, what does that have to do with the game that we all played?
Reviewed. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't affect the game at all. And I will go a step further into territory that is probably not popular, which is I will take a step further and say that the same judgment should have been applied and wasn't applied to Halo 5 Guardians vis-a-vis its advertising campaign versus what the story was. I think lots of people rated that game based on what they thought it was going to be, based on the podcast and the ads that were shown and that stuff. And when the story wasn't that, they felt so betrayed that opinion spilled out into the review. And I think that if people had actually removed themselves from that and just evaluated the game, it would have scored higher. And I don't think that's popular because a lot of people hate Halo 5 Guardians. But if you read reviews from that time, there is a lot of language about how the story, falls flat in terms of Spartan Locke and Master Chief going head to head and all of that stuff. And it's just like, well, none of that was really in the game. Unfortunately, that is shitty advertising, but it doesn't impact the quality of the game or the story or anything like that. So I 100% agree with you. And that's just a weird argument to me that people are speculating on what a game could be. If anything, I could see that a feature that was promised not being in the game would hurt the game's score, if anything. I mean, I would endeavor to not let it impact that. But like, for example, when what's his face was, I always forget his name because it's weird and British, when what's his face was promoting Fable, and he said all these crazy
Peter Molyneux.
Peter Molyneux, thank you. Said all these weird things about like an acorn can fall on the ground and it'll turn to a tree, like that crazy unhinged stuff. When he said that, I feel like some people probably played that game and was like, that was just complete bullshit, and then just probably lowered the score. So I would say, if anything, there's probably it probably has the opposite effect. So I don't really understand that argument at all, but I 100% agree. You have to review the game you played.
Yeah.
The game you played. The
Yeah,
state you
because
played it in, all that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and it even becomes worse when you realize that some developers are more transparent about those aspects, right? So it could have happened where stuff was cut from a bunch of games you don't even aren't aware of, and I'm sure it did. So you can't review hypotheticals, right? You can only review what's in front of you.
That's why after Tom Marks published his 9 out of 10 Cyberpunk review, we had somebody else play it on the Xbox One and write a review. Because there was so much outcry, and we realized that most people were not playing it on high-end PC because most people don't play that way. And so we were like, well, let's have somebody play it on Xbox One, and the reviews were very different, right? And that's because the experience was completely different. And that's not to say that, you know, the person who played on a PC has a less valid opinion or that they lied about the game that they played. It's just that that's the game they played. And if we're going to step into what would be great YouTube channels, I think we've had a few on this podcast. We've had the first 10 hours review. What was the other one?
Reviewing reviews.
Reviewing other people's reviews. I'm going to add on to that and say reviewing really popular games on really low-end PC hardware would be a really good YouTube
the
channel.
Potato reviews.
The potato review. How does this game work on an Asus laptop from 2008? I want to see that as a review style, because I feel like a lot of people are gaming that way. I feel like a lot of people are just using.
You have accidentally stumbled on one of my pet peeves in the gaming industry in general, and that is when people go, "This game plays best on PC." No. It plays best if you have a $4,000 high-end PC. 90% of the community does not.
Yes.
And we know, based on Steam and Valve telling us what most people play their games on, that most of the people playing games on PC, like 70%, are far below these expensive PCs. So stop everyone saying this plays best on PC. No, it doesn't. It can play best on PC. But
100% agree.
80% of the time, 90% of the time, maybe my Series X or PS5 is going to play that game better than your average PC player.
Absolutely. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And what I do is when I review a game on PC, which is rarely by choice because I just have an easier time capturing on console, I always say, like, this game ran really well on my, RTX 3080 Ti, yada, yada, and that sort of stuff. I'll say what my specs are on my PC just to make it clear. Yeah, just to make it clear that that's what I was dealing with. Or if it struggled, I'll be like, it struggled even on this, you know what I mean? So that they know that it's going to be harder to run it. I think that that's important. But the hardware question, it's something I try to stay away from because I feel like it's doesn't really speak to the quality of the game, right? How does it run on different hardware? But it is a factor that, like, you would care about if you were going to pick up a game. Like, if you told me, should I play Cyberpunk? I'd be like, do you own a Series X or a PC? And if you said no, I'd be like, don't do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to make that a recommendation. So
no, we're the same way. We try to call out if there are platform specific differences, but at the same time, the review should be about the game itself. But I mean, Cyberpunk is kind of the go-to example for the past year and a half, right? Because it's such a good example of the differences. But fundamentally speaking, you should be talking about the core of the game. If there's not a huge gap.
That's why I'm excited to play games on my $5,000 gaming PC and then play it on my Steam Deck and see because that's almost kind of, I mean, Steam Deck is probably a little bit more powerful than your average. There you go, Steam Deck. Mine's over there. I got 2 of them. But yeah, I think that that's a good testing device. I've also considered getting like a low-end laptop that can run games just to run it for like an hour. And because I really care about that. Like, whenever I get a review code, I'll play it on my Series X, but then I go back and I play it on my 1X just to see. I just want to see. I don't really usually include it in my review unless it's especially like terrible, but sometimes I'll just run it just to see, like, what does it look like? But yeah, it's an interesting discussion about hardware because I feel like that's another area where you could be doing a disservice to your reader if you're always playing on the best hardware and you're not considering at all what the average player is playing on. To your point about it plays best on PC, that is the most privileged, just, I'm the master race, and it plays best.
I hate that discussion. I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it. It's like plays best if you have $5,000. If you
Yeah.
only have $500, you know what plays best? Not a PC, because $500 will get you a graphics card. And you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's it. So it's a very funny discussion. But yeah, the whole that's one of my pet peeves with PC. And then controller support, if you like playing a controller on PC, because that's just a lie. Most games do not support controllers, and that
Not
frustrates the crap out of
natively.
me on
Yeah.
PC. Yeah,
In fact,
it annoys the crap out of me. It's like, oh, just you don't have to play mouse and keyboard, just play on the gamepad. And I'm like, no, there's like 20% of games play on gamepad my experience. It's like, not the ones
yeah.
I want to play. I
Yeah.
can't play WoW on the gamepad yet. They haven't figured out a way to make that work. So,
Yeah, true. Man, we covered a wide range of things here.
we sure did.
Yeah.
2.5 hours, I think it was. A little bit.
Yeah, we're
almost.
over 2 hours right now. Yeah.
So,
Anything else you wanted to comment on before we head out?
we were going to talk about long reviews versus short reviews. I think we kind of touched on that enough, but
Did.
my opinion is there's room for both, but I really like somewhere in the middle of a tweet and a 30-minute to an hour-long review. Hour-long reviews are crazy to me.
Me too. And then, like,
what game was it? Elden Ring? Yeah.
Well, Elden Ring is a good example, right? That's a tremendously large game, as we know too well, right? That's a different review from a 3-hour point-and-click story game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it just is. So I kind of in the range of, I think we said our word counts, and our word counts were actually pretty similar in what we try to guide towards anyway. I think generally speaking, ours are on the longer end, which that tends to happen for smaller outlets, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But from a video perspective, I like the slightly longer one if it's a bigger game that deserves it. So I tend to approach around the 15-minute mark if it's a bigger game. But if it's a more concise game, I can see the 8 to 10-minute range.
Yeah, and for your audience, I think it probably makes sense to be a little bit longer. I mean, I'm surprised whenever I'm on your shows, the top comment I see in the chat is like, "Oh, it's only like 2 hours. You guys should keep going." And I'm like, "What? These guys are crazy." Like a 2-hour show. If I were a listener, which I would never listen to the content I make or anything like it, but if I were, I would be like, "Dude, shut up! Like, this could have been a 30-minute segment. Like, why are you guys talking so long?" So, but people are just hungry.
People love it.
Apparently, they just get. My theory is they have it in their ear at the gym or while they're cooking or
That's
something.
That's exactly it. While they're working or driving, and it's just
working,
it's
they're like,
keeping
"Oh, it's
company.
only 30 minutes." Yeah,
it's keeping them company. I get feedback on our Discord all the time, even from our patrons who are going to listen to this tomorrow. They say they love just long, open form discussions like this. Love it. So
crazy. Cannot relate, but I'm really glad you like it because it's how I make all of my money and live my life. So it's great.
Yeah. But no,
that's all the major ones. I was going to ask you what your pet peeves were for reviews, but maybe we can save that for another show. Unless you got time.
No. I think we accidentally touched on all of them. My biggest one is not finishing the game. I just can't do it. It
almost doesn't seem like a pet peeve. That seems like a critical failure to the reader.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not even a personal thing. Like, you didn't review the game, period.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna review the new Batman movie, I'm not gonna watch 45 minutes of it and write a review.
That'd be a hilarious review, though. That would be like, he never solved the mystery. Really disappointing. It would have been
Riddler
nice
got away.
It was basically just a torture porn. I don't really.
There's only one combat scene, Yeah, it never really went anywhere. It's just it's mind-boggling because I've actually talked with people who defend that. They're like, well, Hogue has actually done that with us, where he's like, if you can't tell me what that game is about in the first 10 hours, I'm not interested. I'm like, well,
the thing is, I think what Hogue wants somebody. Yeah, I can't justify his argument, but I was just going to say that, like, what he wants is he's a busy guy who wants to know if it's worth his time first and foremost. And so he kind of likes the idea of, like, is it worth it immediately, but then he also has no excuse because I know he's going to play Xenoblade 3 and I'm like, yo, that game is going to take you're going to be playing it until November at the pace that you play games. So
but I would assume, being a JRPG especially, right, that game has a long story arc. Right. And if you play a third of it, you're not going to experience that arc.
You're not going to experience the part where they turn into gods, presumably by the end, and get like crazy anime powers that,
See?
That's just the classic JRPG formula.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. That is a great pet peeve. Ones I have, this is like more technical stuff. I call them a complaint ghetto, which is when somebody writes a review of a game they generally liked, and at the end of the review, they include a paragraph with all the stuff they didn't like.
It's just
squished
all the
together.
negatives in one paragraph. Yeah.
Hate that. Hate it. I call it a complaint ghetto. It's like the reason I don't like it is because one, it ends usually they're at the end of the reviews because they're like it's like an afterthought, and it leaves you with like a negative impression in your mouth, and it also like doesn't cover any of the negatives alongside the good stuff. What I try to do is like any paragraph, if I have nothing negative to say, it can be a fully positive paragraph. But if there's stuff about the thing that I'm praising that I also don't like, I'll smash it right in there. I'll be like, it doesn't do this well, but this is good. And, I just think that that's more useful than like, just for some reason, people really like to just grab their ideas that they don't like and just smash it all at the bottom. Or sometimes you get the opposite, where if they didn't like a game, they'll put all the good stuff at the end and say, here's all the stuff I did like, just as a caveat. I really hate that. Complaint ghettos. Get rid of those.
Complaint ghettos. All right.
Complaint ghettos. I hate it. I also don't like people who are trying to show off their vocabulary in reviews. So one of the statistics that IGN
From
likes
like
to
the
write,
Google synonyms,
yeah, dude,
just trying to change words.
Oh, dude, I hate that so much because it's like the average American is not college educated and reads at like a 10th grade level. That's just the world we live in. And that's actually, by the way, a triumph. We have the highest reading level of any civilian society in history. You know what I mean? We've gotten there. But if you're kind of like flexing the fact that you went to college and showing like all these crazy words, all you're doing is you're making it harder for the people that you're targeting to read your review. And so unless your outlet is called Professor Video Game and you're writing for super smart people with great vocabularies, you're sort of doing a disservice if you use fancy talk, as I call it. And the same goes with jargon. I really don't like it when people say things like IP or SKU or something like that just shows off that you're part of the industry. And so I try to my tone of my reviews is friend on a couch. It's not it's not Professor Video Game lecturing you.
Yeah,
and I really don't like it when people do that. So there's another pet peeve I have, just throwing that out there. But I could go on. My list of pet peeves is really long. I have a bunch of stuff that when I see it in a review, I'm like, I wouldn't have done that. I really wouldn't have, so
I think that's fair though. And again, we've said this many times, but it definitely ties into the audience that you believe to be reading the review.
If your website is called Professor Video Game and you have like a pretentious approach to games, that's hilarious. Go for it. I just don't think like if you're seasoned gamers or seasoned gaming, I bet is probably going toward like, a mix of uneducated and educated people who have just been doing this for a while. Probably a lot of white collar, blue collar people there, probably more blue collar than white. I don't know, but
I don't know.
Probably. Yeah. I can tell you who IGN's going for, which is like teenagers who are not yet old enough to go to college. You know what I mean? Like that's probably our biggest reader. And if that's the case, you know, you don't need to use crazy words and show off how fancy you are. So that's just
I think that's fair.
Anyway, weird way to end the show, but I wanted to get
no, but I think it's a good end cap in the sense of, we've kind of covered all the critical topics, and it's interesting because we may have to, well, maybe one day we'll kind of revisit this a year out or something with maybe a bigger group. Because I was thinking about this as you and I were getting ready to talk. It's like we're just two people writing reviews, very different outlets, and we're just two opinions. But if we did the same exact conversation with 4 other people, we might have had more disagreement or different ideas, right?
I would love to get that guy who was tweeting about how proud he is to not finish games on this podcast to talk to him, because I think his whole opinion is like it's like equity and fairness and anti-crunch, which I get. 100%. I get it. You're just a dude doing a day job who doesn't want to have to be expected to spend 80 hours playing a game and wants to be able to write the reviews. But I think that has to be at the top of your review.
Literally.
Like review after the first 10 hours or review the first 2 chapters or whatever it is that you're doing. And also, I just think that the way IGN thinks of it, they're not paying you to play the game. They're trying to pick people who were already planning on playing the game, and they pay them to write about the game after they're done playing it. And so it's like, if I was going to play Xenoblade Chronicles 3 anyway, I already would have spent that 120 hours playing it for free. And so they're basically just paying me to then, after I'm done, write up my thoughts. So they're not paying me for 80 hours, so that I don't have to expect from them a $12,000 check for a review because I'm charging them by the hour or whatever. I'm just charging them for the 3 hours it took me to write the review. It's not a lot of work. And so I think that the prices they pay me are fair. But some people, maybe they have a chip on their shoulder, or maybe they have a different understanding of what their responsibilities are, but it's not you're being told you have to play this game. You have to do this for 60 hours and then write it. It's, hey, were you going to play this game? Do you mind writing a review on it as well? Awesome. And that's the way I think of it, because I'm a freelancer, so I can say no to any review if I'm like, I don't really feel like spending my time that way. I'm not going to write the review about it. Or I wasn't planning on playing that game, so maybe find somebody who's already going to play it and give it to them. But also, if I were salaried at IGN, I happen to just know this because I worked in their office for so long. They also don't do that at IGN. They don't go, hey, you're salaried, you have to play this game. They go, hey, you like the series, right? Would you mind doing the review? And if they go, I don't really have time for that, they go, okay, we'll find a freelancer. And so it's very much like, I'm not paying you for the 80 hours to play. I'm paying you for the 3 hours to write, the 5 hours to write, whatever. And I think if you look at it that way, then the argument that he made on Twitter of I shouldn't be expected to play this game for 60 hours completely falls apart, because either A, that's a problem with your company.
Yep.
Right. Your company is like forcing you to write reviews, or you aren't really interested in playing the games you're reviewing anyway. So maybe they shouldn't have been assigned to you to begin with. If they weren't something you were going to play Elden Ring no matter what.
Yep.
You know what I mean? How hard is it for you to just write a review after the fact? Right now, if you weren't going to play Elden Ring and you're Hogue and you go, hey, you have a month to play through all of Elden Ring and write the review, I would expect Hogue to be like, dude, pay me $8,000 for that. That sounds like, painful. So I just, it's a very, I understand the nuance there, but we should get somebody like that who literally thinks like hard stance that you shouldn't have to finish a review.
We
I
would
would love
be
to just
arguing the whole time.
Yeah, but maybe I would try to see their point of view. I'm really I would try, but I don't think that they would move me on that one.
I wouldn't move on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty strong on that one. Yeah.
I was gonna say I'm very stubborn when it comes.
You told me this before.
Yeah, when it comes to things like that, and if I feel that I'm in a good place on firm ground with something, especially if it's something I have control over, good luck shifting me. Like, and this is season gaming is my outlet, right? And we funny enough ended up in the same place, even under different circumstances, because what you're saying applies to us too, in that the people reviewing the games want to review them, right? They're going to play them most likely anyway, and they volunteer to review them. It's not about money or anything. It's just the fact that they want to review that.
They want to review it. You're giving them an outlet to get published, and you're giving them the game for free and early sometimes, and that's also kind of a perk. So I get it, man. Like I worked 7 years for small outlets. Almost that entire time I didn't make $1 off of my work, and part of it I was on a news beat, which is like a tough gig because that's not even fun, right? That's just you like pumping out press releases and stuff like that. So like I get it, but I built out my portfolio that way, and I used that portfolio to approach Dan Stapleton and say, here's games I reviewed, hire me, and he gave me a shot. So
that's the entire point. That's Steve, who writes for our site and has been with me since 2018. I want to say he got a job last year working for a tech company writing because he used his portfolio at Season Gaming, which is awesome, right? That's exactly what we want.
And that has the added benefit of you get to keep him, huh?
Yeah, he still does a lot of content for us.
Have you lost a lot of writers to or other publications?
There's a few people that have kind of come and go because, again, this is all for reviews now, but in general, our methodology at Season Gaming is there's no mandate to write a certain amount, right? You write what you want to write.
Volunteer work, so you can't really tell them you have to do this.
Right.
See, I've worked for outlets that basically said you did. They're like, if you want to be a reviewer for our site, you need to pump out 5 to 10 news articles a day, and it was like,
but then what quality are you going to get out of that? Like, you're going to get disgruntled people who don't want to do that, and you're going to get poor quality.
They did. You get what you pay for in this industry a lot of times. So,
very true. But anyway, I mean, my point was that we ended up at the same result of compared to the person who's saying, I don't have full time or getting compensated for playing an 80-hour game, so I'm going to play 20 hours and do the review. And it's
not what you're getting paid for. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it is at your company. It's just not the way I think of it. It's like you have to be a gamer who loves gaming and is going to play these games, and you just choose to review the ones that you were going to play anyway, right? Or I mean, that's definitely not true for me. Like I reviewed Postal 4, a game I never would have played, North Legends, etc. But I also have a very different brain where like I just like gaming and I like playing lots of different games. And so when somebody comes up to me and goes, "Do you want to play this one that you've never, that you wouldn't have normally gone on to?" And I go, "Yeah, that sounds fun. I want to play something crazy and weird." Or even Xenoblade. I probably would have played Xenoblade, but I wouldn't have grinded to play it all in 1 month. I probably would have played it over a really long period of time. And so to me, that's like fun to get out of your comfort zone and just like play a game and try to connect with it and see if it's good and see if it connects with you. And I love that, but my brain works differently than most people's. I'm like anytime I get to play a game or like get out of my comfort zone is like a joy to me, even if I don't like the game, because then I get to explain to other people why it's bad or mediocre or whatever. And it's just so much fun to me. And you also discover games you never would have fallen in love with if you did just step out there. Like I've praised Ace Attorney to you many times, a game that I discovered because I got assigned a review. And now I'm like a diehard ride or die with that series. So and one of these days I'm going to get you to play Dual Destinies because that's the one you should have started with.
I know.
So,
I just
just play it on your phone. You play it on.
Is it all on Steam?
It is on Steam.
Oh, we may have an outlet now because now
there you
I don't like sitting in my PC, but now I have Steam Deck.
That's right. Yeah,
I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, I'll see if Dual Destinies is on Steam. It's got to be at this point. It's on like every platform. Yeah.
But yeah, and we were talking about the person who plays 15 hours and going back to me being stubborn, like I break things down to their most simple equation, right? What is a review? A review is obviously everything we just discussed, right? You're reviewing a product. Can you offer a review of a product if you haven't fully used it? No, you can't. Period. It's a simple yes equation to me.
I'm going to buy an 8-in-1 toaster oven, and I'm just going to review the reheat setting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, any example you want to give like that, right?
Yeah, it's just crazy. My Titanic example is like I actually want to do that. I want to review the first hour of like calamity movies like the Titanic and just telling you my impressions and then never go back and watch the ending. Just live in blissful ignorance of what
I reviewed Jurassic Park. I reviewed the half an hour when they got to the park. It's really cool. They loved it.
Really cool. Nice dragons. Dragons. Nice
or like, I'm gonna review Microsoft Office. Yeah, Excel's pretty cool. Like, what? That's not Microsoft Office. Like, it's just very hard and cut for me. Like,
doesn't make any sense. And the thing is, even if you get to end credits, there's still an argument to be made that you didn't play the entire game. Like you didn't try all the game modes, did you? You didn't play it on the hardest and then the easiest, and you didn't play. How deep did you go into the end game? Like there's so many nuances. So given all that gray area and stuff that you possibly are missing, the least you can do is get the minimum you can do is get to the end of the game. It's like, come on, man, it kills me. But luckily, we both work for outlets that require it. Because I won't lie to you. I worked for outlets in the past that were like, you have 2 days to review the game, which obviously isn't enough time if it's like 60 hours. And he goes, you're going to hit embargo. If you don't finish the game in time, just write the review anyway. And I've written reviews for games that I haven't completed, but under duress each time. I was like, I don't feel like I should be writing the review. And he's like, write it. This is your job. You need to get it out there.
We see it every day. I mean, like I said, I read other reviews and you can tell some of them are dumb enough. Like I said, Kotaku being that one example of telling you how much time they played the game and letting you know they didn't get halfway through it.
I don't think that they're dumb in doing that. I think that that's part of their philosophy. They have a difference in opinion that like you can review something after 15 hours and more power to them. It's their outlet to control. Their reviews are as valid as anybody else's. But
no, they're not.
I certainly. Yeah, I mean, my opinion is certainly that like there are informed reviews and there are uninformed reviews, and I think people who didn't fully experience something probably, again, if there was a weighted system, if I was making a weighted system Metacritic, people who fully finished the game would get way more weight than somebody who played 15 hours. But
you're being more kind than I am.
At least they're being transparent. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Because if they tell you they're being 15 hours, at least they're putting their stamp on there. They're not pretending like they played the whole game and clearly missing bits. So I think that's the worst offender, right? Is when they don't even talk about, their experience with it or whatever.
Yeah.
So
still shouldn't call it a review. But
maybe a preview, maybe a early hours review. You can call it a first First impressions.
Impressions. That's the word I've used many times with other people when I've had this debate, is if you are going to play a game for a period of time, not finish it, don't call it a review, call it your impressions.
Right. And then there's some people who would say you got to the end credits, that's basically just an impression piece because you didn't play all the extra stuff. You didn't play it on the hardest difficulty, yada, yada. Right. And those people are probably going to have but they're going to have the same thing as you. Is like, yeah, you played it, but you only did the beginning, the intro. You didn't actually fully experience it. And to those people, I actually think that they have a point to some degree, but I'm just like, yo, what are most people going to do?
Yeah.
What are most people? Another pet peeve I have. Oh, dude. Okay. Sorry. I have to talk about this one. I have to talk about this one because it's still, every time I think of it, I get as pissed off today as I was when it happened, which is I really have a problem with people not who review the game on easy. I think that's totally valid if you review a game on its easiest difficulty. I have a problem with people who review games on easy when it has a major impact on what their impressions of the game will be. And I will bring up yet again Persona 5, because I had a friend, a colleague, who wrote a review of Persona 5. He played it on the easiest difficulty. The easiest difficulty has no fail state. You cannot die. Like it removes all of the parts of gameplay, and all of my critiques with Persona 5 are about the gameplay. They're about the stuff like the fact that it doesn't tell you, at least I'm not talking about the Royale version, but the original version, there was no way to find out what somebody's weakness was without trial and error. So sometimes you would just guess wrong and then you would get wiped and die. And that was super annoying. Lose 30 minutes of progress because of this dumb way that they do save systems, right? Hugely annoying, right? Stuff like that. The fact that you're always getting paralyzed or put to sleep, and status effects seem to just constantly bombard you in that game. All that stuff that I was just like, dude, this game design stuff is killing me. And he was like, I didn't really experience any of that. And I was like, how? And then he was like, I played it on the difficulty where combat just basically you click a button and it auto plays through combat for you until you win. And that was how he played the game. He gave the game a perfect score. And I was livid. And I was like, and so every once in a while I'll see that debate pop up of, is playing games on easy a valid way to play the game? And I'm of two minds. Of one mind, I'm of course it's fine. You don't need to be highly skilled to review a game or enjoy a game. And if you don't enjoy the combat parts of the game and you kind of want it to just be a more passing experience, that's totally fine. It's a valid opinion. I do think you should state it in your review that you played it on easy difficulty and that there were some differences. But I especially think it's important that you state it if playing it on easy removes components of the game that have a big impact on that game, and that somebody else is going to have a completely different, because if your goal in a review is to talk to people who are going to be playing the game, you want to appeal to the widest audience possible. So why would you play it on a mode that fewer people play on and then not talk about everything else? And so I feel like the same could be said if you play games only on the hardest difficulty, and most people don't do that, and you're just writing about the review from that. So I try to play games on each difficulty.
Average.
But I usually play it on hard or harder, but I'll also go back and play like the first couple hours on normal just to see. But it really just depends on how much that changes the game. In Persona 5's case, a lot. And I feel like if you review the game and you're not talking about any of the game mechanics, you are completely doing a disservice to the reader that's not going to experience that. And so every time I think about that review, I'm just like, oh my God, why did you write that? Like, that's crazy to me. So
one less serious, I would say, less kind of extensive example is Cuphead. So I reviewed Cuphead, love it, right? Played it on normal and then beat on expert, but it does have simple mode. What simple mode does in Cuphead is each of the bosses has like one less phase. So like,
damn, that's way different.
Yeah, so more people can get through it, right? But what I made sure to call out in my review is, here's the game at its core. It has expert mode, which is more challenging, right? It just takes more health, etc. But you can play through on simple mode if you want. However, be aware that it won't show you everything of each of the bosses like it does.
Yeah, you miss like entire transformations and stuff.
Yeah, and one of the best parts of that game is that the transformations and stuff. So yeah, I made sure to call that out. But yeah, I completely agree with you that there's, as with a lot of this discussion, there's nuance until in how you explain things to your reader.
Yeah. It's just I see the point with the easy mode, because sometimes it does impact the game in a real way that might affect your like impressions of it.
And there's other people like me that don't enjoy playing games on easy mode. Like if
it feels boring. unchallenged.
Like exactly. Like if someone says, well, you can play this on easy mode and it does X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, well, I don't want that. So I'm glad they explained it because I wouldn't want to play the game that way.
Yeah.
Right.
I also kind of have a bone to pick with difficulties as a game design mechanic, because if you're designing your game, shouldn't you tell me what the experience should feel like in terms of its challenge and in terms of its balance and that sort of stuff? And I really don't like it when developers are like, why don't you choose how much health bosses should have? I'm like, what? Like, that's your job. Like, you made the game. So I really am a fan of just like Elden Ring's approach. Just the game is what it is, and you either like what we made or you don't like what we made, but we don't make you kind of decide how the game functions mechanically. It's like, you're the designer.
Yeah. And one of the things that in that vein has done well over the years as they've evolved, Elden Ring being the best example, is it gives you all the tools you need to make the game easier if you so choose.
True.
You can make the game easier.
Actually, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's a whole
games, the way to make it easier is just to grind too. Like Assassin's Creed is a game mode that is a game that famously does not have difficulty modes, but you can, at least in the newer ones, grind until it's easier. I kind of hate that. And I also hate that they microtransact XP so that the game is intentionally more boring unless you play more money. Like, that's a whole separate, frustrates the crap out of me. But it does, like, I like that it at least tells you how difficult the game should be. I feel like if you're a game designer, you should tell me that.
Yeah, but we should have a separate discussion about that sometime.
That would be a good one. Game difficulties is a really touchy topic. People get super personal about it because there is a gatekeeping element to it, right? Where you're like, oh, you're not a real gamer if you don't play on this difficulty, whatever. To me, it's not about gatekeeping. To me, it's more about, like, it feels a little lazy as a developer. I know that's weird to say, but it feels a little lazy if you're a developer and you're like, oh, we'll make everything, and then you can kind of pick how difficult it is. I'm like, you're designing the experience. Like, you tell me how difficult it should be. I'll figure out if I like that it's that difficult, or if I'm like, dude, this is way too hard. They're crazy. But I feel like sometimes they're a little scary, or they're either scared that they're going to make it too hard, and maybe talking down to the player, or they don't want to alienate people and keep them out of the game just because of the skill threshold. I get all that. It just, it frustrates me as somebody who critically analyzes games, where I'm like, well, which version of the game are we talking about? Because those are all very different. It's almost like you made 4 different games in a certain way. So with Cuphead especially, they made 3 different games.
Especially, like I was gonna say, if it changes mechanics, because that's cool. At that point.
Or you know what really sucks? When they have different endings. So you don't even really see the full ending unless you play it on the hardest difficulty. And I'm like, I kind of like that, but on the other hand, I'm like, how substantial? Like, some games, you miss an entire act, a post-credits act, if you don't play it on the hardest difficulty. And when that happens, I'm like, dude, you should tell me that at the beginning of the game, because I would risk looking stupid if there was an entire act I didn't play at the end because I didn't. Yeah, that really bothers me too. Anyway, I'm talking your ear off, and it's like midnight where you're at. So
it's fine. We had a good conversation, man.
Yeah, it's fun.
I hope that anyone watching this has enjoyed it. I know that game review methodology is a big topic in the gaming kind of community. So I'm very curious for anyone that watches this, and this will be up for patrons. If you do like exclusive content, timed exclusive content, like supporting independent outlets, we have a lot of that for our patrons here at Season Gaming. You can find us on Patreon and check out our tiers. But I also, anyone who checks this out, no matter when you check this out, patron or not, I would like for you to leave us a comment, reach out to Travis and I on Twitter, leave a comment, come to Bitcast, chat with us, bring up the topics, and we'd be happy to talk about this because we just like chatting about these things. We like the perspectives. So,
that's awesome.
But appreciate you. Yeah, man, it's been fun. And I think while talking, we've thought of a few other topics that we can touch on soon too. So.
For sure. And a few new YouTube channel ideas as well.
So anyway, thanks as always for everyone who supports us at Season Gaming. Appreciate you. As always, give you the spiel of if you like this content, please let us know. Please hit that like, hit that subscribe. But as always, thank you, and we will see you next time. Peace.